The year was 1614, and Europe was drowning in turmoil. The fires of the Reformation still smouldered, kingdoms tore themselves apart in the name of faith, and whispers of the Inquisition carried fear into every candlelit chamber. Scholars hid their manuscripts under floorboards. Physicians, alchemists, and visionaries worked by moonlight, caught between discovery and heresy. It was an age where knowledge itself seemed dangerous, and yet longed for all the same. And then, without warning, a strange book appeared. No one knew exactly where it had come from. Some claimed it was printed in the forests of Germany, carried by cloaked messengers. Others said it was delivered mysteriously to scholars' doors, sealed with red wax. Its name was Fama Fraternitatis. The fame of the Brotherhood. It told of an invisible order, hidden for centuries, who now chose to reveal themselves. A secret brotherhood of enlightened men who claimed to possess the deepest truths of alchemy, medicine, and divine wisdom. Their founder, a mysterious figure called Rosenkreuz, had supposedly travelled to the east, gathering knowledge from sages in Arabia, Egypt, and beyond. He had returned to Europe with treasures not of gold but of spirit, knowledge of the stars, the healing of the body, and the transmutation of the soul. The book promised that these secrets were not fantasy. They were real. The Rosicrucians, as they came to be called, declared that the world was on the verge of a transformation, a new dawn of knowledge, a reformation not only of religion but of all sciences, arts, and philosophy. A golden age, hidden until now when humanity was ready to receive it. But who were they? Were they a true brotherhood, scattered across Europe in secrecy? Or were they a myth, an allegory crafted by unknown hands intended to spark the imagination of a weary continent? What terrified and fascinated readers most was their silence. The Rosicrucians did not reveal themselves openly. They left no address, no church, no temple, only the words, "We speak unto you by books, but we shall remain invisible." It was like a whisper in the dark, a promise that someone, somewhere, was guiding from the shadows. The timing was uncanny. Europe in the early 17th century was restless. War was spreading like cracks in a frozen lake. The 30 Years' War loomed, a conflict that would drown entire regions in blood. Amid this, the idea of a hidden order working to heal, to enlighten, to lift humanity into a brighter age. It was irresistible. Scholars devoured the manifestos. Princes and professors alike searched for signs of this invisible brotherhood. Some wrote letters begging to be admitted. Others denounced them as heretics and liars. The debate grew so fierce that in some cities, the Rosicrucians became more feared than the plague, and yet no one could prove they existed. Still, the name Rosicrucian spread like a charm. In smoky taverns, candlelit universities, and secret chambers beneath cathedrals, the rumour of them was enough to stir minds. The rose and the cross, their symbol, began appearing in manuscripts on painted ceilings in whispered prayers. Some said it was the sign of divine rebirth. Others claimed it was the seal of forbidden knowledge. Was it alchemy? Was it sorcery? Or was it something far older, echoing back to Egypt, to the Hermetica, to secrets carried through the ages in silence? Imagine a reader in 1614, a weary scholar, hunched over a desk by the light of an oil lamp. He has survived wars, seen famine, heard the cries of men burned for heresy. And now, in his trembling hands, lies the promise of a secret brotherhood, unseen yet watching. Guardians of wisdom who might perhaps change the world. The words on the page shimmer like prophecy. We shall reform the world, and it shall be no longer subject to corruption. The truth, hidden for centuries, shall be revealed. The secrets of nature and heaven shall be unlocked. It was not merely a text, it was a spark that could ignite a revolution of the spirit. And yet, perhaps that was the most mysterious thing of all. No matter how scholars searched, the Rosicrucians never appeared in flesh. No leader stepped forward, no temple opened its gates. The Brotherhood remained invisible, as though existing only in the mind, in the imagination of those who yearned for hidden knowledge. Some began to whisper that this was the real alchemy, not the transformation of lead into gold, but the transformation of despair into hope. The Rosicrucians had performed a miracle not in a laboratory, but in the soul of Europe itself. The whisper had begun, and once whispered it could not be silenced. The Fama Fraternitatis was only the beginning. Within a few short years, more manifestos would appear. Confessio Fraternitatis and the Chemical Wedding of Rosenkreuz, each more cryptic, more symbolic, more intoxicating. each promising that behind the chaos of the age a secret order was working, slowly, visibly, to guide humanity toward its hidden destiny. The world was listening, the alchemists, the philosophers, the dreamers, and the desperate, all straining their ears to hear that whisper in the shadows. And so, in the midst of blood and fire, the legend of the Rosicrucians was born. A legend that would never die. The rose and the cross, two simple emblems, and yet within them a universe of meaning. When the first readers of the Rosicrucian manifestos tried to imagine the hidden fraternity, they had nothing to guide them but a symbol, a rose, unfolding petal by petal, placed upon a cross of suffering wood. Some saw in it the emblem of Christ, his blood blossoming into salvation. Others saw the ancient mystery of rebirth, a union of opposites, life and death, beauty and pain, spirit and matter. It was both Christian and pagan, both sacred and profane. But the symbol was only the beginning. The Rosicrucians declared themselves to be an invisible college, not a monastery with stone walls, not a temple with gilded altars, but a fellowship without boundaries, without borders, scattered like seeds across Europe. They claimed no allegiance to king or pope, no earthly throne, only to the pursuit of divine truth. This was their power and their mystery. For in a world obsessed with hierarchy, they offered no name, no superior to obey, no visible master to follow, only whispers, books, and symbols. Those who believed in them imagined a hidden circle of sages, men dressed in plain garments, yet possessing wisdom that could pierce through the veils of heaven. Physicians who could cure the incurable, alchemists who could transmute the corrupt into the pure, not only in metals but in men's hearts, mystics who could read the secret alphabet of nature, written not on parchment but in the stars. Their founder, Christian Rosenkreuz, was said to have been born in the late 14th century, a German noble of obscure origin who as a young man had travelled eastward, seeking the wisdom Europe had forgotten. In Arabia he studied the hidden sciences of the physicians, in Egypt the lore of the priests, in Damascus the art of alchemy and the music of the spheres. After years of wandering he returned to his homeland, carrying not treasures of silver, but manuscripts and knowledge. He gathered a small circle of brothers. Together they pledged themselves to silence and secrecy. They would live not for themselves but for humanity, working unseen to heal, to guide, and to prepare the world for an age of illumination. They took as their emblem the rose and the cross, and swore that their work would remain invisible until the appointed time. And then Rosenkreuz died. His body was buried in a secret tomb hidden from the world for 120 years. Only when the time was ripe, the manifesto said, was the tomb rediscovered by his followers. Within, they found his body miraculously preserved, as if untouched by death. The walls of the chamber were inscribed with the mysteries of nature, and at the centre stood an eternal lamp that had burned for more than a century without fuel. It was a myth, an allegory, and yet for many it was irresistible. The idea that somewhere in Europe a secret tomb still lay hidden, containing the greatest secrets of alchemy and wisdom, it ignited imaginations like wildfire. But what did the Rosicrucians truly mean? Were they describing a real fraternity, or was this a story, a carefully woven allegory meant to guide the reader inward, toward the alchemical transformation of the soul? For those with eyes to see, the tale of Christian Rosenkreuz was a mirror. The tomb was not in the earth, but in the heart. The preserved body was not flesh, but the spirit untouched by corruption. The eternal lamp was the light of wisdom, burning within. The Rosicrucians spoke in riddles because the true initiation was not in joining a secret order, but in awakening one's own inner fire. Still, the hunger for a real brotherhood remained. In universities, scholars debated endlessly. Were the Rosicrucians true? Were they among us, disguised as ordinary men? Could one join their order? Letters poured into Germany, addressed to no one, hoping that somehow the invisible fraternity would answer. Men wrote entire books declaring themselves Rosicrucians, or denouncing them as frauds. The strange thing was that the Rosicrucians themselves never replied. Not once did they step forward. Not once did they reveal a lodge, a master, or a ritual. They remained silent, and in that silence their power grew. For secrecy is a fertile ground. In silence myth takes root, and from myth, belief. To understand why the Rosicrucians so captivated Europe, one must remember the world they lived in. This was a continent scarred by the Inquisition, where a single word against the church could mean fire at the stake. It was a world where kings demanded loyalty not only to crown but to creed. To imagine a brotherhood that owed allegiance to neither pope nor prince, but only to truth itself, was intoxicating. The Rosicrucians became, in the imagination of Europe, what the world desperately needed but could not create: a society of wisdom without tyranny, of learning without corruption, of knowledge that healed rather than destroyed. And so, poets and philosophers began to dream. They envisioned a hidden community scattered across the earth working silently for the good of mankind. They called it the Invisible College. Whether it existed or not did not matter. What mattered was the hope it inspired. The symbol of the rose cross itself carried layers of meaning that no reader could fully exhaust. The rose had long been sacred, a symbol of unfolding, of love, of divine beauty hidden within thorns. The cross was the oldest of emblems, of suffering, of the four elements, of the meeting of heaven and earth. Together they formed a union of opposites: death and life, matter and spirit, the finite and the eternal. For some, the rose upon the cross was the crucified Christ, whose blood had blossomed into redemption. For others, it was the secret flowering of the human soul, rising from the suffering of the flesh into the radiance of the spirit. The emblem could be read 1,000 ways, and perhaps that was the point. It was a mirror, reflecting back to each seeker what they were ready to see. But the veil remained. If the Rosicrucians existed, why did they not step forward? Why hide in shadows when the world was so desperately in need of healing and wisdom? The manifestos answered in whispers. The time was not yet ripe. Humanity was not ready. The Brotherhood would remain invisible until the world could receive its gift without corruption. To reveal themselves too soon would invite persecution, misunderstanding, and destruction. And so, they worked in silence, or so the story said. What is most haunting, perhaps, is that in all the centuries since the first manifesto appeared, no one has ever proven their existence. Historians argue perhaps the manifestos were written by a small circle of idealists, young theologians and mystics in Tübingen, seeking to inspire a reformation of knowledge. Perhaps Christian Rosenkreuz never lived at all, but was a symbol, a myth to embody the invisible fraternity of the human spirit. And yet, the mystery remains. For the Rosicrucians themselves never denied, never confirmed, never explained. They left the world only with a whisper. We are here. We remain invisible. Seek us not, for we will find you when you are ready. The veil of the Rosicrucians remains to this day. Were they a brotherhood of sages walking silently among us? Or were they only an idea, a myth designed to awaken the hidden fire in those who longed for more than the world could give? Perhaps that is the secret of their power, that in remaining veiled they allowed each seeker to imagine them anew. And so the Brotherhood lives on, not in a temple of stone, but in the imagination, the yearning, the hunger of the human soul for hidden wisdom. The Rosicrucians remain unseen, and perhaps that is how they are meant to be. When most people of the 17th century heard the word alchemy, they thought of furnaces, crucibles, and retorts. They imagined men in smoky workshops, hunched over bubbling flasks, trying desperately to turn lead into gold. Kings patronized these secret experimenters, hoping for endless wealth. Churches eyed them with suspicion, fearful of their strange symbols and arcane writings. But for the Rosicrucians, alchemy was never about mere metal. Their manifestos spoke in riddles, in veils of allegory, but for those who listened, the message was clear. True alchemy was not the transformation of lead into gold, but the transmutation of the human soul, the outer fire and the inner fire. To the uninitiated, the alchemist's furnace was a laboratory. To the Rosicrucians, it was a mirror. The fire that burned beneath the crucible was also the fire that burned within the heart. The vessel that held the metals was also the human body. The slow purification of base matter into radiant form was a reflection of the slow purification of the self. Lead, heavy and dark, was the symbol of ignorance, corruption, and sin. Gold, radiant and incorruptible, was the symbol of illumination, wisdom, and divine perfection. The true philosopher's stone, that elusive substance that could transmute any metal into gold, was not a mineral at all. It was the awakened spirit within man. The threefold work, the Rosicrucians, echoing the Hermetic tradition, spoke of a great work, the magnum opus. It unfolded in stages, each marked by a colour, each a passage of the soul through death and rebirth. Nigredo, the blackening, the beginning of the path, when the old self is broken down, when the soul confronts its shadow. Confusion, despair, and disintegration. The crucible must first reduce all to ash. Albedo, the whitening, the washing, the purification. The soul begins to shine with a pale light, cleansed of corruption. It is the dawn after a long night. Rubedo, the reddening, the final stage when the purified soul is united with spirit, when the inner gold is born, the red of dawn, of blood, of life renewed. These were not stages of chemistry. They were stages of the human journey. Each alchemical process, calcination, dissolution, coagulation, was an allegory for inner transformation. And so, the Rosicrucians urged seekers not to chase gold in the furnace, but to discover the gold already buried in themselves. Christian Rosenkreuz and the Inner Stone. The story of Christian Rosenkreuz itself was an alchemical allegory. His travels to the east, his gathering of wisdom, his founding of the Brotherhood, all mirrored the stages of the great work. His death and the secret tomb, hidden for 120 years, reflected the Nigredo, the burial of the self. His body, miraculously preserved, was the albedo, purity untouched by decay. And the eternal lamp that burned in his chamber was the rubedo, the inner fire of illumination that never dies. In Rosenkreuz, the Rosicrucians painted a myth of the alchemist not as a magician of metals, but as a transformer of souls, alchemy as healing. The Rosicrucian vision of alchemy was not only spiritual but also medicinal. In an age when physicians bled patients and relied on superstition, the Rosicrucians whispered of a science of healing based on harmony. They spoke of the tria prima, the three principles of nature, sulfur, mercury, and salt. Not merely chemicals, but forces, archetypes. Sulfur, the fiery volatile principle, the soul of things. Mercury, the fluid, the spirit, the mediator. Salt, the body, the stable foundation. To heal, one must balance these forces, in metals, in plants, and in man. The same laws that govern the stars and the elements govern the organs of the human body. To the Rosicrucians, disease was not random. It was disharmony, a misalignment between spirit and matter. The alchemist, then, was not merely a seeker of gold, but a physician of both body and soul, the alchemical imagination. To modernize, the Rosicrucian language may seem obscure, a tapestry of strange symbols, the green lion devouring the sun, the king and queen dissolving into the sea, the phoenix rising from ashes. But in those symbols lay a language of the imagination, for the Rosicrucians knew what psychology would only rediscover centuries later, that transformation begins in images, in dreams, in the inner theatre of the mind. Alchemy was not only chemistry, but a theatre of the soul. Each flask, each symbol, was a mirror of an inner process. Carl Jung, centuries later, would write that the alchemists were describing the unconscious in symbolic form, that their furnaces were metaphors for psychic transformation. The Rosicrucians seem to have known this long before. They spoke not of laboratories, but of the inner laboratory, not of furnaces, but of the secret fire that burns in the human heart, a hidden revolution. What made the Rosicrucians so enigmatic was that they redefined alchemy at a moment when Europe was obsessed with wealth and power. While kings hired alchemists to fill their coffers, the Rosicrucians whispered that true gold was not in the treasury, but in the soul. While others sought power over nature, they sought harmony with it. This was dangerous. For a society built on greed and ambition, the idea that the real philosopher's stone was inner illumination was quietly revolutionary. It suggested that every man, no matter how poor, carried within him a treasure greater than kings, that the true temple was not of stone, but of flesh, that the path to gold was not conquest, but transformation. The alchemical garden. Imagine a Rosicrucian lodge, not of stone, but hidden in the imagination. A garden, lush with herbs under the moonlight, each plant a symbol, each flower a medicine. At the centre, a fountain of living water. Around it, a circle of seekers speaking softly in allegory, their words like riddles. They do not show each other crucibles or metals. Instead, they speak of the rose blossoming on the cross of life, of the furnace of the heart, of the lamp that burns without fuel. No gold is made that night, and yet each leaves with a treasure, a whisper of inner fire, a seed planted in the soul. This was the true alchemy of the Rosicrucians, not the glitter of metal but the flowering of spirit, the hidden stone. And so, the question arises, what if the philosopher's stone was never a substance at all? What if it was an experience, a transformation, a realization? that within the dross of human weakness lies a core of incorruptible gold, that within the crucible of suffering, the soul itself can be purified until it shines with a light untouched by time. The Rosicrucians hinted that this was their secret, that they had found the stone, but not in a furnace. They had found it in silence, in prayer, in meditation, in the flowering of the rose within the heart. And so, while Europe searched for wealth in the earth, the Rosicrucians searched for light in the soul, the eternal alchemy. Even now, centuries later, the Rosicrucian vision of alchemy lingers like a perfume in the dark. Every seeker who looks within rather than without, every mystic who sees symbols not as fantasies but as maps of the soul, every artist who finds gold in beauty rather than in coin, they continue the Rosicrucian work. The crucible remains, the furnace still burns, but the true metal being transformed is human life itself. The Rosicrucians had turned the quest of kings into the quest of the soul. They had taken the furnace out of the laboratory and placed it in the heart, and in doing so, they redefined alchemy forever. By the early 17th century, Europe was a cauldron of upheaval. The Reformation had splintered the old order, new worlds had been discovered across the seas, and in the heavens the stars themselves seemed to be shifting. Telescopes had begun to reveal skies that contradicted the sacred maps of antiquity. The earth, once thought the unmoving centre of creation, was now a wandering body circling the sun. It was into this restless moment that the Rosicrucian manifestos appeared, strange little books whispering of a brotherhood hidden in the shadows, holding secrets that could unite science, spirit, and nature. The world was hungry for such whispers. For while Europe had known monasteries and universities, it had never known an invisible college, a fellowship bound not by crowns or crosses, but by the search for truth itself. The Rosicrucian promise. In their writings, the Rosicrucians did not call for rebellion, nor did they claim to overthrow kings. Instead, they offered something more radical, a reformation of knowledge itself. They spoke of uniting all arts and sciences under one great vision, of building a world where medicine healed not just the body, but the spirit, where astronomy was not merely the study of stars but of divine harmony, where chemistry was not a grubby pursuit of gold but the unlocking of nature's hidden wisdom. They promised a new dawn, a golden age of illumination, and though their identities remained hidden, their ideas travelled swiftly, carried by the printed page, by rumour, by the restless imagination of a continent searching for hope. The influence on science. It is here that the lines between myth and history blur. No one can say for certain whether Johannes Kepler, the great astronomer, ever held a Rosicrucian manifesto in his hands, and yet his writings bear the same fragrance of mystical geometry, the same vision of the cosmos as a living harmonic order. To Kepler, the planets moved not randomly, but to a celestial music, the musica universalis, the harmony of the spheres. This was not far from the Rosicrucian dream, that the universe itself was an alchemical process, transforming chaos into divine order. René Descartes, too, brushed against the whisper. Before he became the philosopher of clear reason, he had dreams, literal dreams, in which he felt visited by a divine presence, urging him to unite all sciences into one. For years, some claimed Descartes was himself a Rosicrucian, that his great project of unifying knowledge bore their hidden mark. He denied it, but the suspicion lingered. And then there was Isaac Newton. To the world, Newton was the great scientist of gravity and light, but in secret, Newton filled manuscript upon manuscript with alchemical experiments, symbols and translations of hermetic texts. For him, there was no division between science and mysticism. To study nature was to study God's hidden script. His laws of motion may have shaped physics, but his heart longed for the philosopher's stone. It is no wonder some whispered, was Newton himself a Rosicrucian, or at least inspired by their hidden hand? The Invisible College. Beyond individual geniuses, the Rosicrucian whisper seemed to inspire a collective dream, the dream of a fellowship of knowledge. In England, not long after the manifesto circulated, a group of scholars began to gather in secret. They called themselves the Invisible College. They were natural philosophers, experimenters, seekers of harmony between reason and mysticism. They dreamed of founding an institution where knowledge could flourish free from dogma and tyranny. From these gatherings, the Royal Society would one day be born, the first great scientific institution of the modern age. And though historians debate the link, many contemporaries believe the Invisible College was Rosicrucian in spirit, if not in fact. The idea itself was powerful enough, that hidden networks of seekers were working silently, invisibly, to bring light to the world. Mysticism and rationalism. Modern history likes to separate mysticism from science, as if they were enemies locked in eternal opposition. But in the 17th century they were lovers, intertwined. The Rosicrucians embodied this union. They spoke of chemistry in the same breath as angels, of medicine in the same sentences as prayer. To them, the study of the material and the study of the divine were not separate, but reflections of one another. This vision seeped into the very roots of modern science. The first scientists, or natural philosophers as they called themselves, did not see themselves as dismantling mystery. They saw themselves as unveiling it, translating the hidden script of nature into human words. Kepler studied the stars not to strip them of wonder, but to hear their music. Newton studied gravity not as a brute force, but as a divine law, a whisper of God's design. In this sense, the Rosicrucians were indeed hidden architects, not by founding institutions, but by planting ideas. They wove mysticism into the fabric of reason, so that even as science was born, it carried within it a trace of the invisible rose. The critics and the fear, yet not all welcomed the whisper. The Church eyed the Rosicrucian writings with suspicion. Their refusal to reveal themselves, their cryptic promises of hidden wisdom, their talk of reforming knowledge outside the authority of pope or bishop, it smelled of heresy. Governments, too, were wary. An invisible brotherhood, bound by no loyalty to king or crown, was a dangerous rumour in an age when rebellion could topple thrones. Some accused the Rosicrucians of being conspirators, revolutionaries hiding behind mystical symbols. Pamphlets spread across Europe, some praising, some condemning, some mocking. One even accused the Rosicrucians of invisibility because they did not exist at all, and yet, the more their existence was denied, the more fascination grew. For secrecy has a strange power. It makes even absence luminous. The alchemy of ideas. If the Rosicrucians truly existed, they left little trace in stone or flesh, but in ideas their presence was unmistakable. They had taken the secret language of alchemy and turned it inward, transforming it from chemistry into a philosophy of the soul. They had whispered of a fellowship of knowledge without borders, inspiring men to dream of invisible colleges and new societies. They had planted seeds in the minds of Kepler, Descartes, Newton, and countless others who shaped the birth of modern science. Their gift was not gold, nor temples, nor power. It was imagination, the imagination of a new world, where knowledge itself was sacred, where the study of nature was the study of God. A hidden architecture. Walk through Europe's great universities, its libraries, its observatories, and you will find no monuments to the Rosicrucians. Their names are not carved in marble, their faces do not gaze down from portraits, and yet like hidden architects they shaped the foundations. Their ideas echoed in the halls where the Royal Society was born. Their symbols lingered in the margins of scientific manuscripts. Their whispers can still be heard in the writings of men who, while publicly rational, privately sought the philosopher's stone. The Rosicrucians were like builders who laid stones at night, then vanished before dawn. When the morning came, the cathedral stood, but no one could say who had placed the first stone. The secret thread, perhaps this is their greatest mystery, not whether they existed in flesh, but how their whispers endured. For every age has its architects and shadows. Ideas do not always need bodies. Sometimes they need only symbols, dreams, and the yearning of restless hearts. The Rosicrucians may never have built a visible temple, but they built something greater, an invisible architecture of thought, binding mysticism to reason, alchemy to science, imagination to truth. And though the world has changed, the thread they wove still runs through it, like a golden filament hidden in the fabric of history. The Rosicrucians, then, were not merely dreamers of alchemy. They were weavers of a vision that allowed modern science to be born without severing itself entirely from the sacred. They remain invisible, but their influence is everywhere. Not in crowns, not in thrones, but in the hidden architecture of knowledge itself. They did not reveal themselves through appearances. No letters of introduction, no public sermons, no gathering in the marketplace. Instead, the Rosicrucians entered history through words, slender little books, carried by wind and rumour, printed in secret and spread like sparks into a continent of dry wood. These writings came to be known as the Rosicrucian Manifestos. 3 in number, they remain among the most enigmatic texts of the 17th century. Fama Fraternitatis, 1614, Confessio Fraternitatis, 1615, and The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, 1616. They are not long, each could be read in an afternoon, but like keys cut for invisible locks, their words open vast corridors of interpretation. The Fama Fraternitatis, the fame of the Brotherhood. The first manifesto was the Fama Fraternitatis. It began as a story, half history and half dream, of a man called Christian Rosenkreuz. Born of noble blood but poor in means, Rosenkreuz travelled as a young man to the east, to Arabia, to Egypt, to the Holy Land. There he learned the hidden sciences, alchemy, medicine, astrology, the wisdom of sages forgotten by Europe. He returned home, filled not with pride but with the desire to serve humanity. Gathering a small circle of companions, he founded the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. They pledged themselves to secrecy, humility, and healing. They would live not in palaces but in simplicity. They would reveal their wisdom not for gold but for the good of mankind. They would remain invisible until the world was ready. The Fama describes Rosenkreuz's death and burial in a secret tomb, a chamber hidden deep within the earth, untouched for 120 years. When discovered by his followers, the tomb revealed wonders, a perfectly preserved body, a library of secret books, inscriptions of the mysteries of nature, and at its heart, an eternal lamp that had burned without fuel for over a century. The tale was allegory, myth, and perhaps more. Was the tomb a metaphor for the inner self, or was it a real place hidden in some German forest? Was Rosenkreuz a historical figure, or an invention of the manifesto's authors? No one could say, but the Fama ended with a promise. The Brotherhood was real, it declared, and though invisible, it had chosen this moment to speak. The world was on the cusp of transformation. A new dawn of knowledge and harmony was at hand, if only humanity would receive it. The Confessio Fraternitatis, the confession of the Brotherhood. If the Fama was the whisper of a story, the Confessio was a proclamation. Published a year later in 1615, it expanded and clarified the message of the Rosicrucians. Here the Brotherhood declared openly that they sought the reformation of the whole wide world, not merely of religion, but of knowledge, science, medicine, and philosophy. They called for a renewal of the arts, a new harmony between man and nature, a future where hidden truths would be revealed for the benefit of all. Yet the Confessio was careful. It emphasized that the Brotherhood was not seeking power, wealth, or domination. They did not wish to found a new church or kingdom. Instead, they were instruments of divine providence, preparing humanity for what was to come. The manifesto also drew boundaries. It condemned those who sought only gold or vanity through alchemy. It warned that the secrets of nature could not be revealed to the greedy or corrupt. Only the humble, the faithful, the pure of heart would be admitted into the mysteries. Again and again, the Confessio insisted that the Brotherhood remained invisible. Their members walked the world unnoticed, living as ordinary men, yet guided by extraordinary wisdom. They had no temple of stone, no address to be found, but they were present, watching, working silently. To the desperate and the dreaming, this was intoxicating. To the authorities, it was dangerous. For what could be more unsettling than a secret order, invisible yet everywhere, proclaiming the coming of a new world? The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. If the Fama was a story and the Confessio a declaration, the third manifesto was something stranger still, a dreamlike allegory titled The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, published in 1616. Unlike the earlier texts, this one read like a vision, a journey, a fairy tale drenched in alchemical symbols. It told of Rosenkreuz, now an old man, receiving a mysterious invitation to a royal wedding. He travels through forests and castles, guided by dreams, omens, and trials. The wedding itself is no ordinary marriage. It is an allegory of the union of opposites, king and queen, sun and moon, spirit and matter, death and rebirth. Along the way, Rosenkreuz witnesses bizarre and wondrous scenes, a tower filled with alchemical chambers, strange experiments, the death and resurrection of royal figures. The text is dense with symbols, the stages of the alchemical work, the purification of the soul, the ascent from corruption to illumination. To the uninitiated, it seemed nonsensical, even absurd. To the seeker, it was a map of inner transformation. The Chemical Wedding revealed perhaps more than the other manifestos, that Rosicrucian wisdom was not merely intellectual but experiential. It was not enough to read about alchemy. One had to live it to undergo the inner wedding of the soul. The shock wave in Europe, The appearance of these manifestos sent shockwaves across Europe. Some scholars hailed them as divine revelations, others denounced them as dangerous fantasies. Letters were written to invisible addresses begging for admission into the fraternity. Pamphlets appeared defending or attacking the Brotherhood. In taverns and universities debates raged. Were the Rosicrucians real or an elaborate hoax? What made the controversy all the more explosive was the timing. Europe was sliding toward the 30 Years' War, a conflict that would tear the continent apart. Amid this chaos, the idea of a secret brotherhood working silently for harmony and renewal was both terrifying and alluring. Princes dreamed of harnessing their wisdom. Priests feared their heresy. Common folk imagined them as magicians, angels, or demons in disguise. And through it all, the Rosicrucians remained silent. No one stepped forward to claim authorship of the manifestos. No lodge opened its doors. No master revealed his face. The Brotherhood remained invisible, as if made only of whispers and paper. Allegory or reality? Were the manifestos allegories, intended not to describe a real fraternity but to awaken the imagination of readers? The story of Rosenkreuz's tomb, the eternal lamp, the chemical wedding, all bear the mark of allegory, of spiritual instruction disguised as tale. Perhaps the true purpose was not to invite seekers into a physical brotherhood, but to guide them inward, to their own hidden temple. And yet, the possibility of a real brotherhood could never be dismissed. For the manifesto spoke with such authority, such conviction, that many believed they were not mere allegory, but the coded speech of an actual society working behind the scenes of history. Perhaps both were true. Perhaps the Rosicrucians were real, and yet their writings were also allegory. Perhaps their greatest secret was that the distinction between symbol and reality was itself an illusion, the enduring mystery. More than 4 centuries later, the manifestos remain as haunting as when they first appeared. Scholars pore over their lines, seeking historical clues. Mystics read them as scriptures of transformation. Artists and poets find in them endless inspiration. They are not easy texts. They resist the reader, speak in riddles, refuse to reveal themselves at once, and perhaps that is their greatest gift. For the Rosicrucians seem to know that wisdom cannot simply be handed from master to student. It must be sought, wrestled with, struggled over, until it blossoms from within like a rose from thorn. The manifestos were not doors that swung open easily. They were keys slipped quietly into the hands of seekers, keys that only unlocked when the heart itself was ready. The Fama, the Confessio, the chemical wedding, 3 texts, 3 veils, 3 whispers that continue to echo across centuries. Were they the voice of a real brotherhood, or were they only seeds planted in the imagination of a weary Europe? Perhaps both. For sometimes an idea can be more powerful than an army, a symbol more enduring than a fortress, a whisper more lasting than a shout. And so, through their manifestos, the Rosicrucians became immortal, not by revealing themselves, but by remaining veiled, not by answering every question, but by asking questions that still echo, unanswered, in the night. The year was 1616 when a strange little book began to circulate in Europe. It bore a title that was at once alluring and bewildering, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. Unlike the earlier Rosicrucian texts, this one was not written as a manifesto or proclamation. It was a vision, a dream, a journey, as if the very soul of alchemy had been cast into a story. Its language was cryptic, its scenes fantastical. To some it seemed absurd, almost a parody. To others it was a scripture of hidden wisdom, a coded ritual of initiation into the mysteries. Even now, 4 centuries later, it remains one of the most enigmatic works of the Western esoteric tradition. The invitation. The tale begins with Christian Rosenkreuz, now an old man, in his solitary chamber. As he sits in prayer and contemplation, he receives a mysterious letter. The letter is written in golden characters, shimmering with unearthly light. It is an invitation to a royal wedding. But this is no ordinary marriage. The letter warns that those unworthy must not attempt to attend, for death would be the penalty. Only those prepared inwardly, only those who have undergone purification may enter. Rosenkreuz trembles. He knows the path ahead will not be easy. He fasts, he prays, he undergoes inner trials, and then, with humility and faith, he sets out on the journey. Already the allegory is clear. The wedding is not a literal event, but the marriage of opposites, the union of soul and spirit, the alchemical conjunctio. The invitation is the call that comes to every seeker, a call to transformation, to initiation, to a path where much must be surrendered and much endured, the journey through trials. As Rosenkreuz makes his way toward the castle where the wedding will be held, he encounters obstacles and visions. He must cross rivers, solve riddles, pass through gates guarded by angels and strange figures. Each stage is a test of humility, purity, and discernment. At one point, he comes to a weighing of souls. Those who seek to attend the wedding are placed upon scales, their hearts measured against truth. Many are found wanting and turned away. Rosenkreuz himself trembles as he steps onto the scales, but by grace he is permitted to continue. Here the allegory deepens. The journey is the alchemical path itself, the stages of death, purification, and rebirth. The scales are the weighing of the soul, the judgment of whether one has cast off the weight of pride and impurity. To approach the mysteries, one must first be light as a feather, as the Egyptians once taught. The castle of the wedding. At last, Rosenkreuz reaches the castle. It is a place of wonders, vast halls, secret chambers, towers that reach into the heavens. Inside, preparations for the royal wedding are underway. The bride and groom are no ordinary mortals. They are archetypes, the king and queen, the sun and the moon, the masculine and feminine principles of the cosmos. Their union is the great work of alchemy, the joining of opposites to produce the philosopher's stone. But before the wedding can be consummated, trials must unfold. Guests are led through rituals, feasts, and mysterious experiments. At one moment, Rosenkreuz witnesses the death of the royal figures who are sacrificed and dismembered, only to be resurrected through alchemical processes. Death, dissolution, resurrection, the stages of the magnum opus. The king and queen are dissolved into primal matter, purified through fire and raised anew. The wedding is not a single moment, but a cycle of death and rebirth, of breaking down and rejoining, of suffering and transfiguration. The Tower of Transformation. One of the most haunting episodes in the chemical wedding is Rosenkreuz's vision of the tower. Inside this great structure are 7 floors, each dedicated to a stage of the alchemical process. The guests ascend floor by floor, witnessing transformations that defy reason. Metals purified, strange creatures born, the dead brought to life. On the final level, the king and queen are resurrected, radiant with a new glory. Their union is complete and the great work is accomplished. The tower is a symbol of the alchemist's inner journey. Each floor is a step in purification, a stage in the soul's ascent. 7 stages, like the 7 planets, the 7 metals, the 7 days of creation. To climb the tower is to climb through the cosmos itself, to rise from the dense weight of matter into the shining realm of spirit. The wedding feast. After the trials, after the deaths and resurrections, the wedding feast begins. But it is no ordinary banquet. The food and drink are themselves symbolic. Wine that intoxicates not the body but the soul. Bread that nourishes with hidden wisdom. The guests feast not upon flesh, but upon the mysteries themselves. Here the allegory touches upon the Eucharist, upon sacred meals in every tradition where the act of eating becomes communion. The wedding feast is the union made manifest, the celebration of opposites joined, of the soul united with the divine. Rosenkreuz's humility. Throughout the tale, one theme recurs, Rosenkreuz's humility. Again and again, he's tempted to pride, to claim honor or recognition. But each time he resists, choosing instead the lowest place. He calls himself unworthy, he accepts punishment, he hides rather than boasts. In the end, it is this humility that saves him. Many other guests are cast out for arrogance or greed. But Rosenkreuz, who sought nothing for himself, is allowed to remain, to witness the mysteries, to return alive to tell the tale. The chemical wedding thus reveals the Rosicrucian ethos. Wisdom is not given to the proud. The mysteries cannot be seized, only received. The path to illumination begins in surrender. The allegory of union. At its heart, the chemical wedding is about union. The union of opposites, the union of the human and the divine. The king and queen are not simply historical figures. They are the archetypal forces within each soul. Their death and resurrection are the breaking down of the old self, the purification of the inner elements, and the birth of a new being. This union is the philosopher's stone, not a substance to be held in the hand, but an awakening in the heart. A recognition that spirit and matter, heaven and earth, masculine and feminine, are not enemies, but lovers destined for union. The wedding is not a distant event. It is the secret marriage that every seeker must undergo. the inner alchemy of the soul. Reactions and interpretations. When the chemical wedding appeared, readers were baffled. Some laughed, dismissing it as a bizarre fantasy. Others condemned it as heretical. But for those attuned to symbols, it became a sacred text, a guide to initiation. Even now, interpreters struggle with its layers. Was it a coded description of actual Rosicrucian rituals? A satire mocking the pretensions of alchemists? A mystical vision revealed to a single author? Or perhaps all of these at once? The ambiguity is its power. Like all true symbols, it cannot be reduced to one meaning. It is a mirror that reflects back to the reader what they are ready to see. The lasting mystery. More than any other Rosicrucian text, the chemical wedding feels alive. It does not instruct directly, nor does it proclaim. It tells a story, strange, dreamlike, filled with images that haunt the imagination. That is why it endures. For while manifestos may be debated, stories slip beneath the surface of reason. They plant seeds in the unconscious, where they grow silently until the moment of awakening. The chemical wedding was and remains one of those seeds, a text that is less about what it says and more about what it does to the reader. It unsettles, it confuses, it lingers, and in that lingering something stirs. The final whisper. At the end of the tale, Rosenkreuz awakens as if from a dream. He has seen wonders, endured trials, witnessed death and resurrection, and yet he returns to his solitary chamber, humble and unchanged in the eyes of the world. The mysteries remain veiled. The world outside continues in war and ignorance, but within Rosenkreuz something has shifted. A union has been made. A fire burns that cannot be extinguished. That is the secret of the chemical wedding. It is not about kings or queens, not about castles or towers. It is about the reader. Every seeker is Rosenkreuz, invited to the wedding, tested, humbled, transformed. Every soul must undergo the death of pride, the dissolution of the old self, the purification of the heart, and every soul, in time, must rise into the marriage of opposites, the inner union that is the philosopher's stone. The book does not end, for it is not meant to. It is a beginning, an invitation, a whisper. The wedding awaits. The door is open. Will you enter? The Rosicrucian manifestos had promised light. They spoke of healing, harmony, a new dawn of knowledge that would benefit all mankind. To the hopeful it sounded like prophecy, but to others, especially those who held power, it sounded like sedition wrapped in allegory. For Europe in the early 17th century was a world tightly bound by authority. The Church still cast its long shadow, quick to brand heresy wherever new ideas appeared. Kings ruled not only by sword but by divine right, their power shored up by religious orthodoxy. Anything that whispered of an alternative, of knowledge not sanctioned, of a brotherhood not visible, was dangerous. Thus the Rosicrucians, though invisible, quickly became infamous. The fear of the invisible. The manifestos declared, "We speak by books, but we shall remain unseen." At first, this invisibility was part of the allure. It gave the Brotherhood a sense of mystery, of sacred withdrawal. But to rulers and clergy it was unsettling. If such a fraternity existed, where were they? Who were they? Were they priests in disguise, undermining the Church? Were they nobles plotting in secret against the throne? Or worse still, were they magicians consorting with forbidden powers? Invisible enemies are the most feared. For one can fight an army on the battlefield, but how does one fight a brotherhood that leaves no trace, no face, no name? And so suspicion grew. The Church's unease. The Catholic Church, still reeling from the shock of the Reformation, viewed anything that hinted at hidden knowledge with mistrust. The Rosicrucians spoke of alchemy, astrology, and the wisdom of the East, fields long associated with heresy, or at best tolerated only in whispers. Worse still, the manifestos suggested a new revelation, a reformation of a knowledge itself. To the Church, revelation was complete in Scripture. To suggest otherwise was to invite chaos. Some theologians quickly denounced the Rosicrucians as heretics. Others accused them of being Protestants in disguise, undermining Catholic authority through mystical promises. In Protestant lands, suspicion also thrived. Lutheran clergy worried that the Rosicrucians promoted magic and idolatry. Calvinists denounced them as deceivers. The manifestos seemed to belong to no creed, no doctrine, slipping like smoke between established boundaries, and in doing so they provoked fear on all sides. The crown's anxiety. For kings and princes, the Rosicrucian vision was equally unsettling. The manifesto spoke of reforming medicine, law, and science for the benefit of mankind. They praised simplicity, condemned greed, and suggested that true authority lay not in crowns but in wisdom. In an age when rulers relied on obedience, such words were dangerous. Imagine a prince reading that there exists an invisible brotherhood, bound not to him but to a higher law, working silently in his realm. Imagine a court already rife with rumours of plots, of assassins, of secret societies. How easily suspicion could blossom into fear. Some rulers began to wonder, were the Rosicrucians stirring revolution under the guise of mysticism? Was the invisible college a cover for political conspiracy? No proof was ever found, but in an age of fragile thrones, whispers were enough. Pamphlet wars. The controversy gave rise to what historians now call the Rosicrucian furor. Between 1614 and 1620, pamphlets multiplied like wildfire. Some praised the Brotherhood, others mocked, still others attacked. Satirical plays portrayed Rosicrucians as charlatans, wandering quacks promising gold and eternal life. Serious tracts accused them of blasphemy or of being agents of the devil. Scholars debated endlessly whether the manifestos were real, allegorical, or both. For every letter sent begging admission into the fraternity, another denounced them as frauds. Europe became consumed by a strange fever, the search for a brotherhood no one could prove existed. And yet, the more they were denied, the more fascination grew. For every denunciation, 10 more seekers were drawn to the mystery. The shadow of the 30 Years' War. The timing could not have been worse. In 1618, just 2 years after the chemical wedding, the 30 Years' War erupted. It began in Bohemia but quickly spread across the continent, becoming one of the bloodiest conflicts in European history. Catholic and Protestant armies clashed, kingdoms burned, famine and plague stalked the land. In such chaos, whispers of secret societies gained sharper edge. Any hint of hidden influence was seized upon. The Rosicrucians, already controversial, now seemed suspect. Were they aligned with one side or the other? Were they quietly guiding the conflict? Or were they prophets warning of the devastation to come? The truth was more elusive. If the Rosicrucians existed, they gave no public statement on the war. Yet many pamphleteers claimed the manifestos had foretold the coming storm, that the war itself was part of the great purification leading to a golden age. Accusations of sorcery. No secret society can avoid the shadow of magic. The Rosicrucians' talk of alchemy, of eternal lamps, of hidden tombs, was enough to spark suspicion of sorcery. The Inquisition had long hunted witches and heretics. In Germany and elsewhere, witch trials raged. To speak of invisible fraternities working in secret was to invite association with the diabolical. Some pamphlets accused the Rosicrucians of pact with demons. Others claimed they possessed magical invisibility, walking among men unseen. Rumours told of their ability to conjure gold, to heal any illness, to summon spirits. To the fearful, they were magicians undermining God's order. To the hopeful, they were angels of light, protectors working in silence. The line between miracle and heresy was thin, and the Rosicrucians walked it like shadows. The Rosicrucians' silence. Through all of this, the praise, the condemnation, the suspicion, the Rosicrucians themselves remained silent. No one stepped forward to confirm or deny. No lodge opened its gates. No leader revealed his name. The Brotherhood, if it existed, stayed invisible. This silence was their greatest mystery and their greatest defence. For by never showing themselves, they could never be arrested, condemned, or burned. They existed only in imagination, only in rumour, and in rumour they became immortal. Yet the silence also fueled suspicion. Authorities demanded, if you are innocent, why do you hide? If you are true, why do you not reveal yourselves? The lack of answer was itself an answer, but one that each reader interpreted differently. The double-edged legacy. Thus the Rosicrucians became both idolised and demonised. For seekers, they were the hope of a new age, a sign that divine wisdom still lived in the world. For rulers, they were a phantom conspiracy, a threat lurking in shadows. This double edge has followed their legacy ever since. Every secret order, from Freemasons to modern mystics, has faced the same suspicion. Are they guardians of light or conspirators in darkness? The Rosicrucians were the prototype, the first great invisible fraternity to inspire both devotion and fear, a brotherhood of mirrors. Perhaps this was their true genius. By remaining silent, by refusing to reveal themselves, the Rosicrucians became a mirror. Each reader saw in them what he already feared or desired. To the poor scholar, they were patrons of wisdom. To the desperate, they were healers. To the king, they were conspirators. To the priest, they were heretics. To the alchemist, they were fellow seekers of the stone. To the common folk, they were magicians. The Rosicrucians themselves never confirmed nor denied. They let the mirror stand, reflecting humanity's own hopes and fears back upon itself. The eternal suspicion, even centuries later the pattern repeats. In every age, secret societies provoke suspicion. They are accused of pulling strings, of guiding events from behind the curtain. The Rosicrucians were among the first to step into this role, willingly or not. By promising invisibility, they invited projection. By speaking of reform, they invited resistance. Conflict with church and crown was inevitable, for the Rosicrucians represented something neither institution could control: the imagination, and the imagination, once awakened, cannot be burned at the stake, a whisper that survived. Despite denunciations, despite wars, despite accusations of sorcery, the Rosicrucian whisper survived. It outlived kings and popes. It drifted into Freemasonry, into the Enlightenment, into the revival of mysticism centuries later. The church could not silence it. Thrones could not crush it. Because it was not a body to be executed, but a vision. And visions cannot be killed. The conflict with church and crown left scars. It forced the Rosicrucians deeper into myth, further into allegory, ensuring they would never be pinned down by history. But perhaps that was always the plan, for sometimes to survive one must remain invisible, and so the Rosicrucians endured, not in palaces, not in cathedrals, but in the unseen chambers of human longing, where even crowns and crosses cannot reach. If the Rosicrucians were mysterious in their manifestos, one promise was repeated with unusual clarity. They possessed knowledge that could heal, not merely the healing of wounds or the curing of fevers, but a deeper medicine, one that touched body, mind, and spirit as a single whole. In an age when physicians often relied on bloodletting, leeches, and superstition, this promise was electrifying. Imagine a Europe where plague still stalked the streets, where childbirth was perilous, where infection could mean certain death. To hear that there existed a brotherhood of sages, custodians of a higher medicine, was to glimpse hope in a darkened world. But what exactly was this hidden medicine? And how did it connect to the Rosicrucians' alchemical vision? The shadow of Paracelsus. To trace the Rosicrucian approach to healing, one must begin with Paracelsus, 1493–1541, physician, alchemist, and iconoclast. He was a man of fire, railing against the rigid universities of his day, burning their textbooks in public, declaring that nature herself was the true teacher. Paracelsus insisted that disease was not caused by imbalance of humours, as Galen had taught for centuries, but by specific agents, poisons, parasites, hidden forces that could be identified and countered. He spoke of like curing like, the principle that later became the root of homeopathy. He brewed tinctures from minerals and plants, insisting that within each substance lay both poison and cure. But more than this, Paracelsus saw healing as cosmic. Man, he declared, is a microcosm, a little world, reflecting the macrocosm of nature and the heavens. To heal the body, one must also understand its connection to the stars, to the elements, to spirit itself. The Rosicrucians revered him. Though he died decades before their manifestos appeared, his spirit runs through their pages. His image is said to have been venerated in Rosicrucian circles as a prophet of the new medicine. The three principles, sulphur, mercury, salt. In Paracelsian and Rosicrucian thought, health was not simply the absence of disease. It was harmony, the balance of three principles that underlay all matter: sulphur, mercury, and salt. Sulphur was the soul, the fiery principle, the source of passion and combustion. Mercury was the spirit, fluid and volatile, the bridge between body and soul. Salt was the body, fixed and solid, the foundation of form. Illness, then, was not punishment from God, nor mere accident, but disharmony among these principles. Too much sulphur and one might burn with fever or rage. Too much mercury and the spirit could dissolve into madness. Too much salt and the body could harden into stone, into obstruction, into decay. The healer's task was not simply to remove disease, but to restore balance. In this sense, every act of healing was a little alchemy, a transmutation of imbalance into harmony. The Rosicrucian healer. The manifesto spoke of a new science of medicine, hidden but ready to be revealed. Rosicrucian healers, it was said, worked quietly without charge, healing the sick out of compassion rather than profit. They had no interest in wealth or fame. Their art was a gift, not a commodity. Legends grew around them. Some claimed they could cure any illness with secret elixirs. Others whispered of a universal medicine, a panacea that could heal all diseases. Still others spoke of the elixir vitae, the water of life that could extend human lifespan, perhaps indefinitely. But beyond these rumours lay a deeper philosophy. For the Rosicrucians, true healing was not only of the body but of the soul. A sick man cured of fever, but still consumed by greed or hatred, was not truly healed. Illness was a symptom of disharmony, and unless harmony was restored within the whole being, the cure was incomplete. Thus, the Rosicrucian healer was not merely a physician but also a spiritual guide, an alchemist of the soul as much as of the body. The alchemical pharmacy. The Rosicrucians inherited from Paracelsus a fascination with the hidden powers of plants, minerals and metals. But to them, these substances were not merely chemical, they were symbolic, alive with spiritual signatures. Every plant carried the imprint of a star. Every metal corresponded to a planet. Gold to the sun, silver to the moon, iron to Mars, copper to Venus. To prescribe a medicine was to harmonize the patient with cosmic forces, to bring man's microcosm into alignment with the macrocosm. Alchemy provided not only the language but the methods. Distillation, fermentation, calcination. These were ways of separating the pure from the impure, the essence from the dross. The alchemist's laboratory was also a pharmacy, a place where the hidden virtues of nature could be drawn out and concentrated into powerful remedies. Yet behind the alembics and retorts lay a deeper truth. The laboratory was a mirror of the inner self. Just as the alchemist purified metals, so too must the healer purify himself. For only a pure vessel could channel the universal medicine. The universal medicine, few ideas have captured the imagination more than the panacea, the universal cure. The Rosicrucians hinted at it, but always in veils. They spoke of an essence that could heal all illness, renew youth, even conquer death. Some equated it with the philosopher's stone itself, the perfected substance that could transmute not only metals but also the human body. But to seek it for selfish reasons was folly. Those who lusted after eternal life, they warned, would never find it. The panacea was not given to greed but to humility. It was as much spiritual as physical. To drink of it was not merely to extend one's years, but to awaken into harmony with the divine. Whether the Rosicrucians truly possessed such a medicine, or whether it was allegory for inner healing, remains unknown. But the dream of it inspired generations of seekers, alchemists, physicians, and mystics alike. Conflict with orthodoxy. Such ideas were not without danger. The established medical faculties, tied to universities and tradition, saw Paracelsian and Rosicrucian medicine as heresy. To reject Galen was to reject centuries of authority. To claim that disease could be cured with alchemy was to step outside the bounds of respectability. The Church, too, was wary. Medicine that invoked stars, planets, and hidden forces bordered on astrology and magic. Healing without the sanction of priest or sacrament smacked of heresy. And the promise of a universal medicine threatened the very idea of death as the wages of sin. Thus, Rosicrucian medicine lived in shadows, whispered from healer to patient, practiced in secret, never openly proclaimed. Echoes in later medicine. Though condemned by some, the Rosicrucian vision did not vanish. It left traces that can still be seen. In the rise of chemical medicine, where remedies were distilled from minerals rather than merely herbs, one sees the echo of Paracelsus and the Rosicrucians. In holistic traditions that view body and spirit as one, their influence lingers. In the dream of a universal cure sought by scientists even now in the form of vaccines, antibiotics, or gene therapies, one hears the same ancient longing. Perhaps most of all, in psychology's recognition that healing must address not only the body but the soul, the Rosicrucian whisper endures. Carl Jung himself saw alchemy as a map of the psyche, and in Rosicrucian allegories he glimpsed a language for the transformation of the unconscious, the healing brotherhood. Imagine, then, the picture that haunted Europe, an invisible fraternity of healers, walking unnoticed through villages and cities. They ask no fee, they wear no emblem, yet when they enter a sick room, cures follow. A child on the brink of death recovers, a fever breaks, a despairing soul finds peace, and then, just as silently, the healer departs, leaving no trace but restored harmony. Whether real or imagined, this vision was powerful. In a world of plague and war, the thought that somewhere unseen there were men working for the good of all, this was itself a medicine, a balm for the soul. Perhaps that was the greatest Rosicrucian cure of all, the healing of despair through hope, the alchemy of healing. In the end, the Rosicrucians did not separate medicine from alchemy. For them, every illness was a kind of lead, heavy, corrupt, impure. And every cure was a transmutation, a turning of lead into gold, of sickness into harmony, of despair into renewal. The physician was an alchemist, the patient a crucible, the illness the dross to be burned away, and the gold that emerged was not merely health, but wholeness, the shining unity of body, soul, and spirit. The Rosicrucians promised not immortality of flesh, but a deeper kind of immortality, the renewal of the soul, the awakening of the inner light. Their medicine was alchemy, and their alchemy was medicine. Both were one and the same. And so, while plague raged and war consumed the land, the whisper endured. Somewhere, unseen, there were those who held the secret of healing, not only of the body but of the world itself. By the mid-17th century, the direct storm of the Rosicrucian manifestos had quieted. The pamphlet wars subsided, the furious debates dwindled, and the invisible Brotherhood retreated once more into shadows. But their influence did not vanish. Like alchemical vapours rising from a crucible, it drifted into new chambers, new lodges, new rituals. One of those chambers was Freemasonry, the emergence of a new brotherhood. Freemasonry, as history tells it, began in the guilds of medieval stonemasons, builders of cathedrals, keepers of geometric secrets, bound by oaths of loyalty. By the 17th century, as cathedrals ceased to rise, the lodges of masons began to open their doors to speculative members, men who were not builders of stone but of ideas. Philosophers, nobles, and scholars entered, seeking in the lodge a space of fraternity, ritual, and hidden wisdom. It was in this fertile ground that Rosicrucian seeds took root. For the Rosicrucians had promised an invisible college, a fellowship of wisdom unbound by nation or creed. Freemasonry offered a visible form of such a fraternity, a society cloaked in ritual, bound by secrecy, rich in symbol. The transition was seamless. Shared symbols. The Rosicrucians had given the world the rose and the cross, the union of beauty and suffering, spirit and matter. Freemasonry carried this symbol forward, embedding it into certain rites. In some Masonic traditions, the rose cross became the emblem of higher degrees, a sign of spiritual rebirth beyond the square and compass. Both orders shared an obsession with geometry and architecture. The Rosicrucians spoke of hidden temples, not of stone, but of the spirit. Freemasons took the image of Solomon's Temple as their central myth, a sacred building whose construction mirrored the construction of the human soul. In both visions, architecture was allegory. To build in stone was to build in spirit. And then there was the secrecy. Both fraternities cloaked themselves in veils, not to hoard power, but to protect wisdom. Symbols replaced plain speech, allegory replaced doctrine, ritual replaced catechism. For what is hidden, paradoxically, becomes more luminous. The higher degrees. As Freemasonry developed, it sprouted higher degrees beyond the simple rituals of the lodge. Among them emerged the Rosicrucian degrees, weaving the rose and cross into Masonic law. The 18th degree of the Scottish Rite, known as the Knight Rose Croix, explicitly carried the Rosicrucian emblem. Its rituals speak of resurrection, illumination, and the quest for divine truth. In England, the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, founded in the 19th century, drew directly on Rosicrucian symbolism, open only to master masons. Here, the fusion of Rosicrucian and Masonic traditions became explicit. But even before these formal unions, the whispers were there. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Freemasonry's growing mythos carried echoes of the Rosicrucian manifestos, invisible brotherhoods, sacred architecture, the transformation of man through initiation. The invisible college and the lodge. Recall the Rosicrucian dream of an invisible college, a fellowship of seekers scattered yet united, working silently for the good of mankind. This dream found form in the Masonic lodge. Within its chambers, men of different ranks and faiths could meet as equals, bound not by crown or creed, but by fraternity. Within its rituals, symbolic deaths and rebirths echoed the Rosicrucian chemical wedding, the alchemical cycle of dissolution and renewal. The lodge was visible, yet its meanings remained invisible. Its architecture, gestures, and words concealed mysteries that outsiders could only guess at. In this, it became the living successor to the Rosicrucian vision, accusations and suspicions. Just as the Rosicrucians had drawn suspicion from church and crown, so too did Freemasonry. Priests accused them of heresy, kings of conspiracy. They were said to plot revolutions in shadows, to summon powers forbidden, to undermine throne and altar alike. And always, at the heart of these suspicions, lay the old Rosicrucian whisper, an invisible brotherhood guiding history from behind the veil. Even today, conspiracy theories about Freemasonry echo phrases once hurled at the Rosicrucians, accusations of hidden masters, of secret knowledge, of an unseen hand shaping events. Whether true or not, the pattern is unmistakable. Continuity of vision. So did the Rosicrucians truly merge into Freemasonry? Historically, the answer is complex. The manifestos of 1614-1616 predate the formal emergence of speculative masonry. Direct links are difficult to prove. Yet the resonance is undeniable. Both movements drew from the same well. Hermeticism, alchemy, biblical allegory, the yearning for a fraternity of wisdom. Some historians suggest the Rosicrucian manifestos themselves may have been early expressions of the same cultural current that gave rise to Freemasonry. Others believe Rosicrucians deliberately veiled themselves in Masonic lodges, hiding in plain sight. Whatever the truth, the continuity of vision is clear. A brotherhood seeking not power but illumination, not gold but wisdom, not domination but harmony. The rose within the temple. Picture a Masonic lodge in the 18th century. Candles flicker upon the altar, casting shadows on the square and compass, on the Bible resting at the centre. The master of the lodge speaks in allegory, guiding initiates through rituals of death and rebirth, urging them to build not only with hands but with hearts. And there, in the higher degrees, appears the rose cross, a reminder of a lineage older than the lodge itself. It whispers of Christian Rosenkreuz, of the secret tomb, of the eternal lamp that never goes out. It ties the lodge not only to the builders of cathedrals, but to the invisible fraternity that promised to reform the world. Thus, in the very stones of Freemasonry the rose blooms. Freemasonry as vessel. One might say that Freemasonry became the vessel that carried the Rosicrucian current forward. Where the manifestos had sparked brief fury, Freemasonry built structures that endured. Lodges, constitutions, rituals that spread across continents. Within these, the Rosicrucian spirit could flow more quietly, sheltered by the respectability of a fraternal order. In this vessel, the ideas of hidden wisdom, of symbolic death and resurrection, of the union of opposites continued to circulate, passed from initiate to initiate, century after century. The broader legacy. Through Freemasonry, Rosicrucian ideas seeped into Enlightenment thought, into revolutionary movements, into the very architecture of modernity. The Rose Cross became a hidden emblem in art, literature and music. Poets like Goethe, philosophers like Lessing, even composers like Mozart, all brushed against these currents, blending Rosicrucian and Masonic symbolism into their works. The ideals of fraternity, equality and illumination, so central to Freemasonry, carried with them the faint perfume of Rosicrucian roses. The mystery persists, and yet the Rosicrucians never vanished entirely into Freemasonry. Their identity remained elusive, their whisper distinct. Even as lodges spread across Europe and the New World, seekers still searched for the invisible college, still wondered if behind the Masons lay an even older order, still hidden, still guiding. Some claimed that the true Rosicrucians remained apart, revealing themselves only to the few. Others argued that they had deliberately hidden within Freemasonry, their symbols disguised as architecture, their secrets buried in ritual. Perhaps both are true, perhaps neither. The Rosicrucian way is always the same, to remain veiled, to let the imagination do its alchemy. The rose behind the veil. In the end, the echoes of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry remind us that symbols have lives of their own. A rose drawn upon a cross, a myth of a hidden fraternity, a tale of an eternal lamp. These can migrate from one tradition to another, from Rosicrucians to Freemasons, from alchemists to philosophers, from mystics to artists. What matters is not who owned the symbol, but how it continued to awaken hearts. For the rose does not ask whose hand planted it. It simply blooms, scattering its fragrance into the night. And so, whether through Rosicrucians or Freemasons, through manifestos or rituals, the fragrance of the rose cross endures. A whisper of an invisible brotherhood, still unseen, still guiding, still calling seekers to the inner temple. The Rosicrucian manifestos had spoken of a secret fraternity. men scattered across the world, bound not by blood or nation but by wisdom. They called it no name in particular, but they described its essence. A college invisible, a brotherhood that would reform the arts and sciences, heal the sick, and guide humanity into a golden age. At the time, such an idea was intoxicating and dangerous. For universities were chained to tradition, bound to the authority of Aristotle, Galen, and Scripture. Knowledge was not free, it was guarded by priests, professors, and princes. To dream of a society that studied nature for its own sake, unbound by dogma, was to dream of heresy. And yet, within a generation of the manifestos, such a dream began to take form, a world thirsting for new knowledge. The 17th century was an age of both wonder and terror. Telescopes had revealed moons circling Jupiter, undermining the old picture of a perfect Earth-centered cosmos. Microscopes uncovered tiny creatures teeming in drops of water, invisible worlds hidden within the visible. Alchemists were distilling new substances, sailors were bringing strange plants and minerals from the New World, physicians were questioning the old humours, and yet chaos reigned. There was no common ground for seekers of knowledge. Each worked in isolation, often mocked by universities or condemned by clergy. A chemist might make discoveries, only to have them dismissed as heresy. An astronomer might glimpse truths, only to risk persecution. It was in this climate that the idea of an invisible fraternity, seekers working together, quietly across borders, took hold of the imagination. The Rosicrucian spark, the Fama Fraternitatis, had declared, "We have a treasure more precious than gold. We speak unto you by books, but we shall remain invisible." Many readers interpreted this as a call. Perhaps the Rosicrucians were not meant to be found physically, but to be emulated spiritually. Perhaps the manifestos were less an invitation to join a hidden lodge, and more a summons to form one's own, to gather like-minded seekers into communities of invisible colleges. The idea spread like fire. Across Europe, men began to correspond in secrecy, signing letters with symbols, seeking others who might be brothers in spirit. Some attempted to organize actual Rosicrucian groups. Others, unable to find the elusive fraternity, simply created their own networks of natural philosophers, circles that studied nature, shared discoveries, and worked toward reforming knowledge. From these efforts, history tells us the Royal Society of London would one day emerge, the Invisible College in England. By the mid-17th century, England was fertile ground for such experiments. The turbulence of the English Civil War had shattered old structures of power. Universities were stifled by dogma, but thinkers still thirsted for knowledge. In this climate, small groups began to gather in private homes and chambers, meeting not as rebels but as seekers. They studied chemistry, astronomy, mechanics. They discussed Paracelsian medicine and Hermetic philosophy. They read the Rosicrucian manifestos and dreamed of a new reformation of knowledge. This network came to be known, even in its own time, as the Invisible College. The name was not accidental. It echoed the Rosicrucian promise of a hidden fraternity. And though the members did not all call themselves Rosicrucians, the resonance was unmistakable. Among them were men like Robert Boyle, often called the father of modern chemistry. Boyle was fascinated by alchemy, not merely as superstition but as a hidden science. He studied transmutation, experimented with air pumps, sought the hidden principles of matter. Though remembered today as a scientist, Boyle saw no contradiction in also seeking the philosopher's stone. Others in the Invisible College shared the same spirit, blending experiment with mysticism, observation with symbolism. They were not yet scientists in the modern sense, but seekers in the Rosicrucian mould, men who believed that nature concealed secrets waiting to be unveiled, that truth was both physical and spiritual, and that knowledge was meant to serve humanity, not power. The birth of the Royal Society. In 1660, after years of informal meetings, the Invisible College took on flesh. At Gresham College in London, 12 men gathered to form a more structured institution. With the support of King Charles II, it became the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge. Here, for the first time, science became organised, not as solitary labour, but as collective pursuit. The society held regular meetings, published discoveries, corresponded with scholars across Europe. Their motto was nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it. A declaration of independence from authority, whether Aristotelian or theological. And yet, behind this new institution, the shadow of the Rosicrucian dream remained. The very idea of such a society, free, collaborative, devoted to uncovering nature's secrets for the good of mankind, echoed the manifesto's call. Indeed, some contemporaries believe the Royal Society was the Rosicrucians finally revealing themselves. Pamphlets accused Boyle and his fellows of being members of the invisible fraternity. The suspicion was never proven, but the resemblance was too close to ignore. Science and mysticism hand in hand. To modern eyes, science and Rosicrucian mysticism may seem worlds apart, but in the 17th century they were woven together. Isaac Newton, though later celebrated as the pinnacle of rational science, spent more time studying alchemy and biblical prophecy than physics. His manuscripts are filled with experiments on Mercury, with notes on the philosopher's stone, with diagrams of secret temples. For Newton, the laws of motion and the alchemical fire were not contradictions, but two languages describing the same divine order. Robert Boyle, too, performed chemical experiments side by side with prayers, convinced that uncovering the secrets of air and fire was a way of drawing closer to God. Thus, the Invisible College did not see itself as abandoning mysticism for reason. Rather, it sought to bring the two into harmony, to study nature with rigour, yet also with reverence. This was precisely the Rosicrucian vision. Alchemy as both laboratory and liturgy, knowledge as both science and sacrament, the ideal of service. One of the most striking continuities between Rosicrucianism and the Invisible College was the ideal of service. The manifestos had declared that Rosicrucians worked without fee, healing the sick freely, living simply, seeking no glory for themselves. Knowledge was not to be hoarded, but shared. The Royal Society, though patronised by the king, echoed this ethos. Its members pledged to work not for profit, but for the improvement of natural knowledge. Their discoveries were published, not hidden, so that all might benefit. In this sense, the Invisible College fulfilled the Rosicrucian promise, a brotherhood of seekers, labouring quietly for the good of mankind. Suspicion and secrecy. And yet, as with the Rosicrucians, suspicion clung to the Invisible College. Critics accused them of being alchemists, magicians, even heretics. Some saw their air pumps and telescopes as diabolical contraptions. Others whispered that the society was merely a front for Rosicrucians or Freemasons. Even the name Invisible College invited mystery. For though the Royal Society was visible enough, its roots in secret gatherings, its echoes of Rosicrucian manifestos, gave it an aura of hidden guidance. Perhaps this was no accident, for to study the secrets of nature is always to tread close to forbidden ground. The legacy of the Invisible College. What began as whispers in Rosicrucian manifestos blossomed into institutions that changed the world. From the Invisible College came the Royal Society. From the Royal Society came the foundations of modern science. Physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy. And yet, the spirit of the Rosicrucians did not vanish in this transition. For even today, the ideals of science carry traces of their influence. The pursuit of truth beyond authority, the belief that knowledge should serve humanity, not power, the sense that the universe is not chaos but order, harmony, hidden design. These are Rosicrucian ideals as much as scientific ones. A brotherhood of seekers. Imagine, if you will, a small gathering in 17th century London. A dozen men sit in a dim chamber surrounded by flasks and manuscripts. One adjusts a telescope, another stirs a chemical mixture. They speak in hushed tones of the stars, of transmutations, of the hidden laws of nature. They are not priests, though they speak of God. They are not kings, though they dream of reforming nations. They are seekers, invisible in the eyes of the world, yet quietly shaping its destiny. Is this a meeting of Rosicrucians, or of the Invisible College, or both? Perhaps the answer does not matter, for the line between myth and reality has blurred. The dream of a hidden fraternity working for the good of mankind has become flesh, not in secret tombs, but in the halls of science. The whisper endures. The Invisible College may have given birth to the Royal Society, but the Rosicrucian whisper never faded. Even today, some claim that behind the visible institutions of science and culture, invisible colleges still exist. Networks of thinkers, mystics, and visionaries working quietly, unseen for the unfolding of human potential. Whether true or not, the idea itself is powerful, for it suggests that knowledge is never merely knowledge, but also responsibility, that to learn the secrets of nature is also to heal, to guide, to serve. This, in the end, was the Rosicrucian gift. The dream of a brotherhood of seekers, invisible yet real, binding science and spirit, reason and mystery in a single luminous thread. The invisible college. It was more than a rumour, more than an allegory. It was a doorway. From the hidden temples of Rosicrucians to the public halls of science, from mysticism to modernity, and yet even as the doors opened, the whisper remained. Perhaps it always will. Long before the Rosicrucians whispered their manifestos into 17th century Europe, there was already a lineage of hidden wisdom circulating through libraries, monasteries, and secret chambers. A chain of texts, symbols, and myths stretching back to the dawn of civilization. The Rosicrucians did not invent this chain. They wove themselves into it, presenting their brotherhood as the newest link in an ancient sequence. They called upon the Prisca Theologia, the ancient theology, the belief that all true wisdom had been revealed at the beginning of time and handed down through chosen guardians. The Hermetic writings, the alchemical treatises, the mystical philosophies of Greece and Egypt, all were fragments of this primordial light. To understand the Rosicrucians, one must follow this chain backwards into the dim corridors of antiquity, where Hermes Trismegistus still whispers, and where alchemy was first born not in the laboratory, but in the temple. Hermes Trismegistus and the Hermetica. At the heart of the Hermetic chain lies the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. Part god, part sage, he was said to be a fusion of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, the scribe of the gods, keeper of secret knowledge. The writings attributed to him, known collectively as the Hermetica, were composed in Alexandria during the first centuries of the Common Era. They are dialogues between master and disciple, rich with imagery of light, spirit, and the cosmos as a living being. The Hermetica taught that the universe is one vast divine organism. Man is a microcosm, a mirror of the macrocosm, containing within himself the same elements and principles that animate the stars. Through contemplation, purification, and gnosis, inner knowing, the human soul can ascend, uniting again with the divine source. When the Rosicrucians spoke of the unity of science and spirit, of man as a mirror of nature, of hidden wisdom preserved through ages, they were echoing Hermes Trismegistus, the Alexandrian crucible. The city of Alexandria was the great crucible of Hermetic wisdom. Founded by Alexander the Great, it became a melting pot of Greek philosophy, Egyptian religion, Jewish mysticism, and early Christian thought. In its fabled library, scrolls from every known land were gathered. In its temples and academies, sages debated the mysteries of the soul and the cosmos. Alchemy, too, was born here, not as crude attempts to make gold, but as a sacred art. The earliest alchemists of Alexandria spoke of metals as living beings, growing within the earth like embryos, seeking perfection. The furnace was a womb, the crucible a tomb, the transmutation of lead into gold, a mirror of the soul's ascent from ignorance to illumination. From Alexandria, Hermetic thought spread into the deserts of Egypt, the monasteries of Byzantium, the courts of the Arabs, and eventually into Europe, carried in translations of Arabic texts during the 12th century. The Rosicrucians, centuries later, would claim this inheritance. When they spoke of alchemy as spiritual transformation, when they spoke of the microcosm and macrocosm, they were not inventing new ideas but weaving old threads into a new tapestry. The Hermetic Renaissance. By the 15th century, Europe rediscovered the Hermetic writings. In Florence, the scholar Marsilio Ficino translated the Corpus Hermeticum into Latin, believing it to be older than Moses, perhaps the very source of all wisdom. Renaissance thinkers were intoxicated. Here was a philosophy that united science, religion, and mysticism, that taught man was not a fallen worm, but a divine being capable of ascent. Artists, architects, and philosophers drank deeply from this well. Hermetic principles informed Renaissance magic, Neoplatonic philosophy, and even the proportions of cathedrals. Giordano Bruno, who dreamed of infinite worlds and a cosmos filled with spirit, was steeped in Hermetic thought. The Rosicrucians, emerging a century later, stood on this Renaissance foundation. Their manifestos carried the flavour of Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, and Bruno, the belief that hidden wisdom could reform humanity, that knowledge was not bound by dogma, that man was a living link in the chain of cosmos and divinity. Alchemy as inner transformation. One of the strongest links in the Hermetic chain was alchemy. For the Egyptians and Alexandrians, alchemy was a sacred art of transformation, a drama in which matter and spirit were inseparable. Metals grew within the earth as embryos grow in the womb, striving toward perfection in the form of gold. The alchemist's task was to accelerate this natural process, to purify, to refine, to bring forth hidden perfection. In Europe, this became the language of furnaces and flasks. But the Rosicrucians restored its deeper meaning, that the true furnace is the human heart, the true crucible the soul, the true gold illumination. Thus, when Christian Rosenkreuz was said to have travelled to the east to learn hidden sciences, the allegory was clear. He was inheriting the Hermetic chain, gathering fragments of the ancient wisdom preserved in Arabia, Egypt and beyond, bringing them back to a Europe hungry for renewal. The chain of custodians. The Rosicrucians insisted they were not alone. They saw themselves as inheritors of a chain of guardians who had preserved wisdom through the ages, Egyptian priests who inscribed mysteries in hieroglyphs, Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato who spoke of harmony, proportion, and the immortal soul, Hermetic sages of Alexandria who declared the cosmos divine, Arab scholars who translated and expanded alchemical and philosophical texts during the Islamic Golden Age, medieval alchemists and mystics who cloaked their wisdom in symbols and allegories. The Rosicrucians claimed to be the next link, not inventors, but preservers and renewers. Their manifestos were not so much revelations as reminders that the chain still existed, unbroken, waiting for seekers to grasp it. The Hermetic principle of correspondence. One teaching above all shaped the Rosicrucian worldview, the Hermetic principle of correspondence, often summarized as above, so below. The macrocosm of the heavens is reflected in the microcosm of man. The movements of stars mirror the pulses of the body. The elements of earth mirror the passions of the soul. To understand one is to understand the other. This principle guided alchemy, astrology, medicine, and mysticism alike. It was the logic of sympathy, of hidden connections, of a cosmos woven not from dead matter, but from living analogies. The Rosicrucians embraced it fully. Their rose cross was itself a correspondence, the rose of spirit blossoming upon the cross of matter. Their medicine was correspondence, herbs aligned with planets, metals with organs, all woven into one harmony. In this they were true heirs of Hermes, the Hermetic chain into the Enlightenment. As the Enlightenment dawned, many sought to sever mysticism from reason, to replace allegory with clarity. Yet the Hermetic chain persisted, often hidden, but never broken. Newton studied Hermetic alchemy in secret, filling notebooks with transmutations and mystical diagrams. Leibniz dreamed of a universal language reflecting divine harmony, echoing Hermetic principles. Even Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, with its vision of a society of scientists working for the good of mankind, bore the fragrance of Rosicrucian and Hermetic ideals. Thus, the Rosicrucians were not isolated dreamers, but part of a larger current, the Hermetic current, that flowed beneath the surface of Western civilization, nourishing both mysticism and science, both art and philosophy. The golden thread. If one were to trace a golden thread through history, it might run like this. From Egyptian temples where priests spoke of the soul's immortality, to Alexandrian texts where Hermes taught that man mirrors the cosmos, to Arab alchemists who distilled the secrets of matter, to Renaissance magi who rediscovered the Hermetica, to Rosicrucian manifestos whispering of invisible colleges, to the Royal Society where science took its first organized form. The thread weaves mysticism and reason, symbol and experiment, myth and fact. It is not linear but spiral, looping through ages, appearing, vanishing, reappearing in new forms. The Rosicrucians saw themselves not as the end of this chain, but as a link, one among many, in a story far larger than themselves. The whisper of continuity. Perhaps this is the true meaning of the Hermetic chain, continuity. The sense that wisdom is never lost, only hidden. That even when libraries burn and temples fall, fragments remain, waiting to be rediscovered. That seekers across ages are never truly alone, for they are bound invisibly to those who came before. When the Rosicrucians declared that they were invisible, they may have meant this, that their brotherhood was not confined to time or place, but part of an eternal chain. Anyone who touched the golden thread, who sought wisdom humbly and purely, became a Rosicrucian, whether in ancient Alexandria, medieval Europe, or modern times. The lamp that never goes out. In the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz, the manifestos spoke of a lamp that had burned for more than a century without fuel. Perhaps that lamp was the Hermetic chain itself, an eternal flame passed from age to age, keeper to keeper, never extinguished. The Rosicrucians did not claim to own the lamp. They simply revealed that it was still burning and invited seekers to approach its light. The Hermetic chain. It runs unseen through history, binding Egypt to Europe, alchemy to science, mysticism to reason. The Rosicrucians grasped it, held it aloft for a moment, then vanished again into invisibility. But the chain endures, waiting still, a golden thread hidden in the fabric of time. If the Rosicrucians are remembered for anything, it is their emblem, the rose upon the cross. Two images combined, one soft, one harsh, one blooming, one suffering, one ancient, one eternal. Few symbols have carried so many meanings, woven into so small a form. It appeared in the manifestos like a seal, mysterious and alluring. It bloomed on manuscripts and woodcuts, often accompanied by strange alphabets, stars, and geometric figures. Sometimes the rose had 4 petals, sometimes 5, sometimes 7, sometimes more, each number adding layers of interpretation. Sometimes the cross was plain, other times it radiated with light. To the casual eye it was simply decorative. To the initiated it was a whole cosmology in miniature, a map of spirit and matter, of life and death, of the visible and the invisible. The rose, beauty and secrecy. The rose has long been a flower of mystery. In the temples of Isis, roses were placed upon altars as symbols of secrecy. The Latin phrase sub rosa, under the rose, came to mean confidentiality. For in ancient times, roses carved on ceilings indicated that what was spoken below was not to be repeated. To Christians, the rose became a symbol of Mary, the Rosa Mystica, the mystical rose that blossomed in purity. In chivalric orders, roses were emblems of love, both courtly and divine. In alchemy, the rose symbolized unfolding, the slow blossoming of perfection from hidden bud to radiant flower. Thus, when the Rosicrucians placed a rose upon the cross, they invoked secrecy, purity, unfolding, and hidden wisdom. The rose was not a flower to be plucked lightly, but a mystery to be contemplated. The cross, suffering and matter. The cross, too, is one of the oldest symbols in human history. Long before Christianity, it represented the 4 directions, the intersection of heaven and earth, the balance of opposites. With the crucifixion of Christ, it became the emblem of suffering, of death, transfigured into redemption. To the alchemists, the cross symbolized matter itself, the 4 elements bound into one, fire, water, air, and earth intersecting, forming the foundation of the material world. Thus, in Rosicrucian hands, the cross was not merely the instrument of death, but the very stage upon which transformation occurs. It was the furnace, the crucible, the place where spirit and matter meet, where the soul is tested, broken, and reborn. The union of rose and cross. When combined, the rose and cross created an image both beautiful and terrible. The rose blooming upon the wood of suffering suggested life blossoming from death, spirit rising from matter, beauty hidden within pain. It was the alchemical marriage of opposites, the conjunctio of hermetic thought. For the Rosicrucians, it represented the central mystery, that the soul, like a rose, blossoms only when rooted in the cross of matter. The human condition, flesh, suffering, mortality, is not an obstacle, but the very soil from which illumination grows. Without the cross there is no rose, without matter no spirit, without death no resurrection. It is a paradox and therefore a symbol worthy of mystery. Number and geometry. The rose cross was not merely an image but a geometric puzzle. Different versions carried different numbers of petals. 4 petals mirrored the 4 elements. 5 petals evoke the quintessence, the 5th element, the perfected state. 7 petals echoed the 7 planets and the stages of alchemy. 10 or 12 petals reflected Pythagorean and zodiacal mysteries. Placed upon the cross, these petals became a map of the cosmos. The vertical axis represented spirit, the horizontal axis matter. At the intersection, the rose blossomed, the union of heaven and earth. Around it, circles of stars or letters often appeared, suggesting the macrocosm encircling the microcosm. For Rosicrucian students, to contemplate the rose cross was not merely to look at a picture, but to enter meditation, to walk mentally through the stages of transformation encoded in its form. Esoteric interpretations. Over time, countless interpretations of the rose cross emerged, each layering new meaning upon the old. Christian mystics saw it as Christ himself, the rose of divine love blooming upon the cross of sacrifice. Alchemists saw it as the philosopher's stone, perfection born from the crucible of matter. Hermeticists saw it as the union of opposites, spirit and flesh, sun and moon, male and female. Occultists of later centuries saw it as a key to initiation, each petal a stage, each arm of the cross a gate, leading to the hidden centre where the rose blooms eternal. Each interpretation was valid, and perhaps intentionally so. The Rosicrucians thrived on multiplicity of meaning. Their symbols were not cages for thought, but mirrors reflecting whatever the seeker was ready to see. The rose cross in ritual, though the original Rosicrucians never revealed their rituals, later societies inspired by them, especially within Freemasonry and later esoteric orders, placed the rose cross at the heart of initiation. Candidates were taught to see themselves as the cross, a being bound in matter, subject to suffering and death. Through ritual death and rebirth they became the rose, blooming from the cross, radiant with hidden light. In some rites, the rose cross was placed upon the altar, surrounded by candles, as the focal point of meditation. In others, it was worn as an emblem of initiation, a reminder that suffering and illumination are not separate, but one path, the rose cross as inner experience. More than a symbol on paper, the rose cross was meant to be lived. For the Rosicrucian, to carry the rose cross was not to join a society, but to undergo an inner transformation. Every sorrow, every trial, every cross born in life was an opportunity for the rose to bloom. Every joy, every beauty, every unfolding of love was the fragrance of the rose upon the cross. In this sense, the symbol was not doctrine but experience. To understand it was not to read, but to live. To feel the rose open in one's own heart, even as life nailed one to the cross of matter. Later evolutions. In the centuries after the manifestos, the rose cross travelled far. It appeared in Masonic degrees, in mystical orders like the Golden Dawn, in the writings of poets and artists. Goethe, steeped in Rosicrucian and alchemical lore, invoked its imagery in his works. William Blake, with his visions of suffering and transfiguration, echoed its paradox. Even in modern occult movements, the rose cross remains central, often elaborated into complex diagrams mapping the cosmos, the soul, and the divine. Yet the essence remains the same: union, transformation, the flowering of beauty from the wood of suffering. The living symbol. Symbols die when they become too fixed, too explained. But the rose cross lives because it resists final interpretation. For the mystic, it is Christ crucified and resurrected. For the alchemist, it is the stone revealed in matter. For the hermeticist, it is the marriage of sun and moon. For the poet, it is beauty blooming in pain. For the seeker, it is the path itself, the promise that suffering is not meaningless, but the soil from which wisdom blossoms. Each age sees it anew, each seeker reinterprets it. The rose cross does not bind meaning, it multiplies it. The fragrance of mystery. Picture then a lone seeker in the 17th century. By candlelight he studies a pamphlet bearing the emblem of the rose cross. He traces the petals with his finger, ponders the intersecting lines. He does not fully understand, yet something stirs within him. Perhaps he recalls a loss, a sorrow that marked him. Perhaps he remembers a moment of beauty that pierced through pain. And suddenly the symbol speaks. It whispers that these are not contradictions, but parts of one mystery. The rose upon the cross, the bloom upon the wood. That whisper is the fragrance of the rose cross, not the flower itself, but its scent, elusive, invisible, unforgettable. The eternal bloom. Centuries have passed since the first Rosicrucian manifestos. Thrones have fallen, wars have burned, philosophies have risen and faded, yet the rose cross endures. It blooms still, on the pages of old books, on the walls of lodges, in the meditations of seekers. It blooms in art and poetry, in rituals and visions, in the silent chambers of the heart. The cross is always present, suffering, mortality, the weight of flesh, but upon it always blooms the rose, and that is the promise of the symbol, that even in the midst of pain, beauty unfolds, that even in the wood of death, life blossoms, that within the darkness of matter, the light of spirit blooms eternal. The rose upon the cross, the mystery that is never solved, only lived, the emblem of a brotherhood invisible, and perhaps of every soul. The Rosicrucian manifestos did not merely whisper of secret knowledge. They promised something more daring, a future transformed. Hidden in the folds of allegory, the text spoke of a coming age of light, when all sciences would be renewed, when knowledge would be free, when mankind itself would be reformed. It was a vision of utopia, not a kingdom ruled by kings nor a church ruled by priests, but a fellowship of wisdom, invisible yet universal, guiding humanity toward harmony. For a Europe wearied by plague, war, and corruption, such a promise was intoxicating. But every utopia has its shadows, and the Rosicrucian dream, like a rose blooming upon a cross, carried both fragrance and thorns. The Golden Age promised. The Confessio Fraternitatis declared it plainly. A general reformation of the whole wide world is imminent. This was not the language of secrecy alone, but of prophecy. It was a trumpet sounding across a continent on the brink of chaos. To many it seemed the Rosicrucians were heralds of a new dawn, a divine intervention that would lift mankind out of ignorance. The Golden Age envisioned was not simply political, it was cosmic. The manifesto spoke of medicine that would heal all disease, of sciences that would unlock nature's secrets, of a fraternity that would guide rulers with wisdom, of a humanity reconciled with heaven. It was a dream of harmony, not only between man, but between man and cosmos. The microcosm and macrocosm, long divided, would be united. The rose would bloom fully upon the cross, the hope of the seekers. To scholars and mystics this vision was irresistible. In secret chambers, in candlelit studies, in letters passed hand to hand, they spoke of the Rosicrucian dawn. Some imagined that the Brotherhood was already at work, quietly influencing kings and inventors, preparing the stage for revelation. Others believed that Europe stood at the threshold of a spiritual revolution greater than the Reformation itself. There was precedent for such hope. The Renaissance had already intoxicated Europe with the rediscovery of Hermetic wisdom. The Protestant Reformation had shattered old structures, suggesting new orders could be born. The age of exploration had revealed new worlds across the sea, proof that mysteries still awaited discovery. Why not, then, a new world of spirit? Why not a utopia guided not by greed or blood, but by wisdom? The shadow of control. Yet utopias, even when dreamed in innocence, cast shadows. If the Rosicrucians promised a golden age, who would decide its shape? Who would hold the keys to this reformation? An invisible fraternity, unseen and unknown, promising guidance yet refusing to reveal itself. Such secrecy raised questions as well as hopes. To some, the dream of a universal reformation sounded less like liberty and more like control. Would mankind, in being guided, lose its freedom? Would rulers become puppets of hidden masters? Was the Golden Age a blessing, or a cage gilded in light? Such fears fed the suspicions of church and crown. For what power, visible or invisible, could promise to reshape the entire world without threatening those who already held the reins? The dream of New Atlantis. In 1627, just a decade after the Rosicrucian manifestos, Francis Bacon published The New Atlantis. In it he described an island where a society of wise men, called the House of Solomon, pursued knowledge for the good of mankind. They studied nature, invented machines, healed diseases, and lived in harmony. Bacon was not a Rosicrucian, but his vision echoed their promise. The House of Solomon was, in essence, a visible form of the invisible college. It was utopia written in prose. And yet, even in Bacon's dream, shadows lurked. For the island was not free. It was ruled by a council of the wise, deciding what truths to reveal and what to conceal. Knowledge was not given to all, but filtered through guardians. Utopia, in this sense, meant guidance, but also secrecy, hierarchy, control. The Rosicrucian manifestos hinted at the same paradox. Their golden age would not be born by popular uprising, but by the quiet guidance of an invisible few. The shadow of revolution. As the decades passed, the Rosicrucian dream of reformation mingled with the currents of revolution. The 18th century saw Freemasonry, infused with Rosicrucian echoes, spread across Europe. Lodges spoke of brotherhood, equality, and enlightenment. These ideals fed the revolutions that shook France, America, and beyond. The dream of a society guided by wisdom, free from tyranny, became the rallying cry of the age. But revolutions, like alchemical fires, burn hot. The utopia promised by the Rosicrucians became, in the streets of Paris, guillotines and blood. The dream of harmony turned into the nightmare of terror. Did the Rosicrucians foresee this? Did they imagine their golden age would come through upheaval? Or did they dream of gentler reform? No one knows. But the shadow of revolution clung to their promise. For once men taste visions of a new world, the old order can no longer hold. The problem of perfection. Another shadow lies within utopia itself, the problem of perfection. The Rosicrucians spoke of harmony, but harmony suggests balance of opposites, not their erasure. To promise a perfect world is to deny the role of struggle, conflict, and imperfection in human growth. A rose cannot bloom without thorns, nor a soul without trial. Thus, the Golden Age promised may itself be an allegory, not a literal future. Perhaps the Rosicrucians did not mean a perfect world of flesh, but a transformation of the inner world, the soul's own utopia, where suffering is transfigured into wisdom. Yet readers hungered for literal fulfillment. They longed for a paradise on earth, not only in spirit. And in that longing, disappointment, disillusionment, and fanaticism could take root. Utopia's mirror. Perhaps the truest insight is that utopias are mirrors. The Rosicrucian Golden Age reflected back to Europe what it most desired, and what it most feared. To the hopeful it was a dawn of light, to the fearful it was conspiracy cloaked in roses, to the powerful it was threat, to the oppressed it was salvation. The manifestos gave no blueprint, only whispers. In that ambiguity each reader found his own reflection. The Golden Age became not a map, but a dream, and dreams always carry shadows. The eternal dream. Despite its ambiguities, the dream of utopia endures. The Rosicrucian promise continues to echo in modern visions of harmony, in movements that speak of unity, healing, and enlightenment. It lingers in science's pursuit of cures, in philosophy's search for justice, in spirituality's call to transcendence. And yet the shadows remain. Every vision of paradise carries within it the danger of tyranny, of exclusion, of control. Every promise of perfection risks denying the messy, imperfect humanity that makes us human. Perhaps the Rosicrucians knew this. Perhaps their true utopia was not a blueprint for society, but a riddle, a whisper to awaken the seeker to a deeper truth, that the Golden Age begins not in nations, but in hearts. The Rose of Utopia. In the end, the Rosicrucian vision of utopia is itself a rose cross. The rose is the dream, beauty, harmony, blossoming. The cross is the shadow, suffering, control, imperfection. Together they form the whole. To long for utopia is to long for the rose. To live in the world is to bear the cross. The mystery is to hold both. To let beauty bloom in suffering. To let hope endure in imperfection. This, perhaps, is the truest Rosicrucian utopia. Not a perfect world without shadow, but a world where the rose blooms upon the cross, where even darkness becomes the soil for light. The shadows of utopia. They linger still, haunting every dream of a better world. And yet, without dreams, no rose would ever bloom. If the Rosicrucians left behind no temples, no palaces, no public lodges, where did their spirit dwell? Not in stone, but in symbol. Not in buildings, but in art. From the 17th century onward, their imagery, roses, crosses, alchemical vessels, hidden suns, began to appear like ghosts across Europe's cultural landscape. Painters, poets, and musicians, some knowingly and others unconsciously, became carriers of their whisper. Art became the invisible college's most visible temple, a gallery where mysteries could be veiled in beauty. The alchemical eye in painting. In the 17th century, Europe's canvases bloomed with allegories. Patrons demanded biblical and mythological themes, but painters, schooled in hermetic and alchemical lore, often slipped deeper meanings into their work. Take, for instance, the paintings of Johann Valentin Andrea's circle in Germany. Andrea, long suspected of being involved in the Rosicrucian manifestos, moved among artists who layered canvases with symbols, flasks hidden in backgrounds, roses woven into fabrics, suns and moons watching silently from skies. These were not accidents, they were codes, signals to the initiated that the Rosicrucian vision was alive in pigment. Elsewhere in the Netherlands, painters of still life arranged vanitas scenes, skulls, hourglasses, extinguished candles. At first glance they were moral warnings about mortality, yet when one looked closer, other symbols emerged, blossoming roses beside bones, alchemical vessels half hidden, books marked with strange letters. These hinted not only at death but at transformation. The Rosicrucian promised that from decay, new life blooms. In Catholic lands, overt Rosicrucian imagery was dangerous, but even there, the language of flowers and stars spoke softly. The rose in Marian iconography became both Christian and Hermetic. The crucifix became a cross of alchemy as well as of faith. Painters knew how to layer meaning so that the devout saw one story, while seekers glimpsed another beneath the paint. The architecture of mystery. Though the Rosicrucians claimed no public temples, architecture itself became a language of their ideals. Baroque churches rose with dizzying domes, light flooding down like divine illumination. Hidden in their geometry were hermetic proportions, circles within squares, octagons bridging heaven and earth. Architects like Borromini and Bernini, though not Rosicrucians by name, carried the same vision, that space could be alchemical, that stone could transmute light into symbol. In gardens, too, the influence stirred. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the rise of mystical landscapes, filled with grottos, obelisks and labyrinths. At first they seemed playful, places for nobles to wander, yet their layouts often mirrored alchemical journeys, descent into darkness, emergence into light, the marriage of water and stone. Some estates even featured hidden Rosicrucian chapels, their walls etched with roses and crosses, their doors veiled from the casual visitor. Thus, while no cathedral bore the Rosicrucian name, Europe itself became their canvas. Every dome aligned to the sun, every rose carved into stone, every labyrinth winding toward a secret centre, all echoed the same alchemy. Music as alchemical language. If painting and stone carried visual symbols, music carried the Rosicrucian spirit in sound. The 17th century was an age of mystical harmony. Composers believed music mirrored the cosmos, that notes and intervals were reflections of planetary ratios, the musica universalis. To compose was to echo creation itself, to join heaven and earth in vibration. In Germany, Michael Meyer, court physician, alchemist and devoted Rosicrucian, published Atalanta Fugiens, 1617, a strange book combining emblems, poetry and music. Each page carried an engraving filled with alchemical symbols, accompanied by verses and a piece of music for 3 voices. To read the book was to see, read and hear alchemy at once. Meyer called it a musical alchemical emblem book, the first of its kind, a Rosicrucian symphony in paper. Later, in the Baroque, Johann Sebastian Bach would compose fugues and cantatas so rich with numerical symbolism that scholars still debate their hermetic meaning. Bach himself was a Lutheran, yet his weaving of harmony, proportion, and sacred text echoes the same Rosicrucian conviction that music is both science and prayer, both mathematics and mystery. Through music, the invisible college found its most subtle voice. For while symbols on paper could be banned and paintings censored, no one could forbid the vibrations of harmony. They entered the ear, moved the soul, and vanished again into silence, as invisible as the Brotherhood itself, poetry and literature as vessels. The Rosicrucian influence bloomed richly in poetry. Johann Valentin Andreae, whether or not he authored the manifestos, wrote allegories steeped in Rosicrucian imagery, tales of utopian societies, hidden wisdom, and journeys of transformation. His Christianopolis described a city of the wise, echoing the invisible college. In England, poets like John Donne and George Herbert filled their verses with alchemical imagery, roses blossoming amid crucifixes, love entwined with death, paradox blooming into transcendence. Donne's line, "Our 2 souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet, a breach but an expansion," reads like the conjunctio itself, the alchemical union of opposites. Later in France, Voltaire would mock Rosicrucians, weaving them into satirical tales. Yet even satire kept their myth alive, ensuring their name endured in the literary imagination. In Goethe's Faust, alchemy and the Rosicrucian quest appear again. The striving for hidden knowledge, the longing to transmute the human soul. Goethe himself was drawn to both Freemasonry and Rosicrucian lore. Faust's laboratory is also Rosenkreuz's tomb, a crucible of despair and illumination, the theatre of symbols. Even the stage carried Rosicrucian echoes. Masks and allegorical plays, popular in courts, often staged the union of king and queen, sun and moon, death and resurrection. Beneath the glitter of costumes, these were alchemical dramas, teaching through spectacle what the Rosicrucians encoded in manifestos. In Vienna, the operas of Mozart, a Freemason steeped in esoteric lore, carried the thread forward. The magic flute, with its initiatory trials, its temples of wisdom, its marriage of sun and moon, is nothing less than a Rosicrucian parable set to music. The Queen of the Night and Sarastro embody the struggle of opposites. The hero and heroine undergo purification through fire and water. Audiences laughed, sang, applauded, and yet within the opera, seekers recognized the echo of the chemical wedding. Art is alchemy. At its core, Rosicrucian art is alchemical. It does not simply depict but transforms. A painting is not merely pigment on canvas, but a crucible where opposites meet: light and dark, form and emptiness, matter and spirit. A poem is not mere words, but a distillation of spirit into sound. A fugue is not mere melody, but a weaving of cosmic harmony. The artist, like the alchemist, works with base matter, pigments, notes, syllables, and transfigures them into gold, into beauty that awakens the soul. In this sense, every true artist is a Rosicrucian, whether or not he claims the name. The hidden gallery. Imagine walking into a gallery in 17th century Europe. At first you see only portraits of nobles, still lifes of fruit, religious scenes. But look closer. In the background of a Madonna, a small rose blooms on the sill. In the folds of a nobleman's cloak, a star of 7 points is embroidered. On the edge of a table, a flask reflects candlelight. These are whispers, hidden emblems, breadcrumbs left for seekers. The casual visitor sees nothing but beauty. The initiate sees an entire philosophy encoded in brushstrokes. This is the hidden gallery of the Rosicrucians, not a single place, but scattered across Europe's art waiting to be read. The rose that still blooms. Centuries later, the Rosicrucian current in art continues. Symbolist painters of the 19th century, Gustave Moreau, Odilon Redon, filled canvases with mystical roses, crucifixions drenched in colour, alchemical suns. Poets like Yeats and Rilke drank from the same spring. Even in modern art, the fascination with hidden symbols, with geometry, with paradox carries the Rosicrucian fragrance. For art, like the Rosenkreuz, is never exhausted. Its meanings multiply, its symbols unfold like petals, its beauty lingers even as its message remains veiled. The eternal work of beauty. Perhaps this was always the Rosicrucians' true temple, not hidden tombs, not secret lodges, but art itself. For art, like their own manifestos, speaks in allegory. It hides as much as it reveals. It requires contemplation, patience, humility. The same virtues demanded of any initiate. To encounter a painting, a poem, a symphony, is to undergo a little alchemy, a transmutation of perception. And in that sense, every gallery, every concert hall, every library is a Rosicrucian lodge, a place where symbols bloom invisibly, where seekers gather without knowing, where the Rosenkreuz is contemplated anew. The Rosicrucians may have remained invisible, but their art has never ceased to bloom. A rose painted on canvas, a fugue rising in air, a verse etched on paper, each a fragment of the invisible college, each a petal of the eternal rose. For a time, the Rosicrucians seemed to vanish. After the furor of the early 17th century, the manifestos, the pamphlet wars, the debates and denunciations, silence fell. Europe was consumed by the 30 Years' War. Thrones toppled, churches burned, famine and plague spread. In the chaos, the dream of an invisible college seemed to dissolve into myth. Yet myths never die. They go underground, sleeping like seeds beneath winter frost, waiting for the right season to bloom again. By the 18th century, as Enlightenment rationalism spread across Europe, the Rosicrucian whisper returned, not diminished, but transformed. It mingled with Freemasonry, with alchemy, with Hermeticism, and gave birth to what historians call the occult revival, the Enlightenment's shadow. The Age of Reason promised clarity, science, and progress. Philosophers declared that superstition was ending, that light was banishing darkness. Universities abandoned astrology and alchemy for physics and chemistry. Religion, they said, would give way to reason. But wherever light shines too brightly, shadows lengthen. The human spirit is not fed by reason alone. Beneath the Enlightenment's rationalism grew a hunger for mystery, for poetry, for the sacred veil. It was into this hunger that the Rosicrucian myth re-emerged. The Rosenkreuz, once feared and mocked, became a symbol of hidden wisdom resisting the cold glare of reason. Rosicrucians and Freemasonry. By the 18th century, Freemasonry had spread widely, its lodges flourishing across Europe and the New World. Though outwardly devoted to fraternity, morality, and architecture's allegories, Masonry was fertile soil for Rosicrucian ideas. Higher Masonic degrees began to incorporate explicitly Rosicrucian symbols. In the Scottish Rite, the 18th degree, Knight Rosenkreuz, placed the Rosenkreuz at the heart of initiation. Ritual spoke of resurrection, illumination, and hidden wisdom. In England, the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia was founded in 1867, drawing master masons into explicitly Rosicrucian study. Its members explored Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, and mystical Christianity, carrying forward the legacy of Christian Rosenkreuz. To outsiders, these were fraternities. To initiates, they were continuations of the invisible college. The Rose Cross, once invisible, now bloomed openly in lodge halls, embroidered on aprons, etched into jewels of office. Alchemy's transformation. Alchemy, too, found new life in the revival. By the 18th century, chemistry had claimed the laboratory. Metals and elements were catalogued, their processes stripped of allegory. To scientists, alchemy was dismissed as superstition. Yet in secret circles, alchemy survived, not as crude attempts to make gold, but as spiritual allegory. Mystics interpreted the philosopher's stone as enlightenment, the transmutation of lead into gold as the purification of the soul. Books of alchemy were reprinted, studied, meditated upon. In this, the Rosicrucian influence was clear, for they had always declared that alchemy's true goal was transformation of the self, not of metals. The revival simply made explicit what the manifestos had whispered. The Romantic imagination. The late 18th and early 19th centuries saw the rise of Romanticism, a movement of poets, artists and philosophers who rebelled against the mechanistic worldview of the Enlightenment. For them, the world was not a machine, but a mystery. Romantic poets found in Rosicrucian imagery a wellspring of inspiration. The Rose Cross, with its paradox of beauty and suffering, life and death, became a symbol of the romantic soul itself. In Germany, Novalis wrote of Christian Rosenkreuz as a mystical figure of longing. His unfinished novel, The Novices of Say, evokes Rosicrucian themes of hidden wisdom and the unity of nature. Goethe, steeped in hermetic and alchemical lore, wove Rosicrucian motifs into Faust, where the quest for ultimate knowledge mirrors the alchemist's journey. In England, the Rosicrucians appeared in satire as well as reverence. Writers like Thomas de Quincey and William Blake blended mysticism, allegory and visionary imagery that often echoed the manifestos. Blake's paintings of roses entwined with crosses shimmer with Rosicrucian resonance, even if he never named the Brotherhood outright. The esoteric orders. The 19th century saw a flowering of esoteric societies claiming Rosicrucian heritage. Some were sincere, others opportunistic. In France, societies like the Fraternité des Frères de la Rosenkreuz declared themselves heirs of Rosenkreuz, blending mysticism with political aspirations. In Germany, Rosicrucian symbolism entered mystical lodges and magical fraternities. In America, new Rosicrucian groups arose, claiming to continue the invisible college in the New World. Among the most influential was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in London in 1887. Though not explicitly Rosicrucian, its rituals drew deeply from Rosicrucian imagery. Initiates advanced through grades named after alchemical and Kabbalistic symbols. The Rose Cross was placed at the centre of meditation, a key to understanding the union of opposites. From the Golden Dawn came figures like William Butler Yeats, who blended Rosicrucian mysticism into his poetry, and Aleister Crowley, who carried the symbolism into darker and more controversial realms. The Rosicrucian Museum of Symbols. The revival produced a flood of books, pamphlets and images. Printers reissued alchemical emblems from the 17th century. Scholars collected manuscripts, analysing them not as superstition but as coded philosophy. Artists illustrated new versions of the Rose Cross, each adding layers of geometry, astrology and Kabbalah. By the late 19th century, one could walk into a European bookshop and find entire sections devoted to Rosicrucian lore. The once invisible fraternity had become a visible obsession, and yet, its core remained elusive. For no matter how many groups claimed the name, the true Rosicrucians remained hidden, their identity always veiled. Perhaps this was intentional. Perhaps the Brotherhood lives only in the imagination, blooming anew in each generation. The American Rosicrucians. Across the Atlantic, Rosicrucian ideas also took root. By the early 20th century, societies like AMORC, Ancient Mystical Order Rosicrucis, emerged in the United States, presenting Rosicrucianism as a path of mystical study open to modern seekers. AMORC blended Hermetic philosophy, meditation, and symbolic ritual, presenting itself as the continuation of the original Brotherhood. They built temples, published journals, and eventually founded the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum in San Jose, California, a striking return to the Hermetic chain's Egyptian roots. To some, this was dilution, turning mystery into organization. To others, it was fulfillment, the invisible college finally opening its doors. Either way, the Rosicrucian whisper had crossed oceans, adapting to new lands and new centuries. The shadow of charlatans. As always, with renewed fascination came deception. Many opportunists declared themselves Rosicrucian masters, selling initiation, promising hidden knowledge, exploiting seekers' hunger. Pamphlets appeared claiming to reveal the secrets of the fraternity, for a price. This too was part of the Rosicrucian paradox. Their invisibility made them impossible to verify, and so anyone could claim the name. For some, this discredited the tradition. For others, it only deepened the mystery. If there were false Rosicrucians, might there not also be true ones hidden still? The occult revival's legacy. The occult revival of the 18th and 19th centuries did more than revive Rosicrucian lore. It reshaped Western culture's relationship to mysticism. It gave birth to modern, esoteric movements, from theosophy to New Age spirituality. It influenced literature, art, and music. It provided symbols that remain potent even today: the rose, the cross, the eternal lamp. Above all, it proved the resilience of the Rosicrucian myth. Even after centuries of silence, the Brotherhood's whisper could rise again, adapted to new languages, new nations, new seekers. The rose that never dies. Perhaps this is the truest Rosicrucian secret, that the fraternity itself is eternal, not because of unbroken institutions, but because of the power of its symbols. The rose cross is a seed. Wherever it falls, it can bloom anew. In Renaissance utopias, in romantic poetry, in Masonic rites, in Californian museums, the rose cross adapts, unfolds, whispers again. The occult revival was one such blooming. Another will come, for the rose never truly dies. The occult revival, a time when the Rosicrucian whisper was rediscovered, reshaped, reimagined, and in that reimagining kept alive. A time when seekers once more dreamed of invisible colleges, hidden masters, and the union of Rosenkreuz. The age of reason had tried to silence the mystery, but the mystery returned, more vibrant than before. For the human soul, no matter how rational, will always hunger for roses that bloom upon the cross. When we speak of Rosicrucians, the mind first drifts to secrecy, to invisible brotherhoods moving like shadows behind history. Yet, strangely, their whispers also echo in the very disciplines that became the foundation of modern knowledge. Alchemy's vessels became chemistry's laboratories. Mystical correspondences became psychology's symbols. The dream of an invisible college became the Royal Society, the Academy of Science. And so we come to a paradox. The Rosicrucians were dismissed as fantasists, even frauds. Yet their influence lingers in the sciences that define our modern world. Their legacy is like the fragrance of a rose, unseen, intangible, but impossible to deny. The alchemical roots of chemistry. In the 17th century, the line between alchemy and chemistry was blurred. Alchemists mixed herbs and metals in crucibles, not only seeking gold, but also tinctures and medicines. To them, every experiment was both material and spiritual, every retort a miniature cosmos. It is easy to forget that some of the fathers of modern science were also students of alchemy. Robert Boyle, often called the father of chemistry, was fascinated by the Rosicrucian manifestos. His invisible college carried their very name. Boyle's Sceptical Chymist, 661, is hailed as the foundation of modern chemistry. Yet he also filled journals with notes on the philosopher's stone, the transmutation of metals, and the spiritual meaning of experiments. Isaac Newton, too, spent more time on alchemical manuscripts than on mathematics. His notes, still preserved, detail experiments with mercury, sulfur, and strange coded formulas. He saw no divide between science and mysticism. Gravity and transmutation were part of the same hidden order. Some contemporaries even suspected Newton was a Rosicrucian himself, or at least guided by their philosophy of nature as divine script. Thus, chemistry was not born in opposition to alchemy, but from its womb. The crucible of the alchemist became the laboratory of the chemist. The Rosicrucian promise of reforming medicine and science was fulfilled, though in ways even they may not have foreseen. The discipline of secrecy. One of the Rosicrucians' most striking qualities was secrecy. They promised wonders, medicine, wisdom, illumination, yet refused to reveal themselves. Why? Some said it was humility, others protection. But there is another layer. Secrecy was itself a discipline, a way of guarding knowledge so that only the worthy could receive it. In alchemy, recipes were written in riddles, symbols, and allegories. Dissolve the green lion, wed the red king with the white queen. These were not instructions for fools, but veils for the wise. This culture of secrecy influenced early science profoundly. Even the Royal Society, founded on open publication, retained the practice of coded correspondence, hidden experiments, and guarded discoveries. Scholars often shared results only within trusted circles. In many ways, the Invisible College never ceased to be invisible, only the outer shell became institutional. Modern science prides itself on transparency, yet secrecy remains woven into its structure. Patents, classified research, restricted laboratories. These are echoes of the Rosicrucian ethos. Wisdom must be handled with care, hidden when necessary, lest it be misused. The Rosicrucian vision of healing. The manifestos had promised medicine that would heal the sick freely without fee. This too found strange fulfillment in modern science. Today's pharmacology, though rooted in chemistry, carries the same dream: to find remedies for all diseases, to extend life, to uncover a panacea. The quest for antibiotics, vaccines, and gene therapies echoes the Rosicrucian promise of a universal medicine, and yet the shadow remains. Just as the manifestos warned against greed, so too modern science wrestles with the commercialization of healing. Patents, profit, and politics entwine with cures. The Rosicrucians had envisioned healers who lived simply, seeking no gold. Modern medicine is powerful, but the dream of free healing for all remains unfulfilled, a whisper still waiting. Psychology and the alchemical soul. Perhaps the most unexpected Rosicrucian influence lies in psychology. For centuries, alchemy was dismissed as superstition. But in the 20th century, the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung looked again. He saw in alchemical imagery crucibles, kings and queens, deaths and resurrections. Not failed chemistry, but symbolic maps of the psyche. To Jung, the alchemists had projected their inner processes onto matter. The philosopher's stone was not a literal object, but the self, the union of conscious and unconscious. The alchemical wedding was not of metals, but of the masculine and feminine within. In this, Jung was reading Rosicrucianism anew. For the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz is nothing if not an allegory of individuation, a soul passing through trials, death, and transformation, emerging renewed. The Rosicrucian dream of inner alchemy found modern form in depth psychology. Thus, even in therapy rooms and psychology texts, the Rosenkreuz lingers. The scientific myth of progress. Another echo of Rosicrucian influence lies in the myth of progress. The manifestos had declared a general reformation of the whole world, a golden age of knowledge and harmony. Modern science, too, carries a utopian undercurrent, the belief that discovery leads to improvement, that knowledge will banish disease, poverty, even death. Yet, as with the Rosicrucians, shadows haunt this vision. Knowledge has brought cures, but also weapons. Discoveries have built bridges, but also bombs. The same science that heals has the power to destroy. The Rosicrucian emblem captures this paradox. The rose blooms with beauty, but upon the wood of the cross, suffering, sacrifice, shadow. Progress is never pure, it is always entwined with its opposite. Invisible colleges today. The dream of an invisible college did not end with the Royal Society. It lingers in modern institutions, research networks, think tanks, hidden laboratories where knowledge is pursued beyond the public eye. Consider the global scientific community, researchers collaborating across borders, united not by nations but by shared inquiry. This is, in essence, the Rosicrucian vision. And yet, secrecy persists. Certain discoveries are restricted, some knowledge shared only with those deemed initiated into the right circles. Even in the digital age, invisible colleges thrive. Online groups, encrypted communications, circles of thinkers working quietly beyond the spotlight. The form has changed. The essence remains. The rose in the machine. If one looks closely, Rosicrucian ideals echo even in technology. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, space exploration. All are quests to unveil the hidden laws of nature, to transform humanity itself. Each carries utopian hopes, longer life, expanded knowledge, unity of mankind. Each also carries dangers, control, surveillance, misuse. The rose blooms within the machine, but always upon a cross. The paradox is eternal. The secrecy of symbols. One reason the Rosicrucians endure is that they spoke in symbols, not doctrines. Symbols survive translation, censorship, and time. They can be reinterpreted by each age. Science, too, speaks in symbols, equations, diagrams, formulas. These are not reality itself, but symbolic languages pointing to hidden truths. Just as alchemists drew circles and triangles to represent processes, physicists draw wave functions and atoms. Both are maps of mysteries, never the territory itself. Perhaps this is the hidden Rosicrucian gift to science, the reminder that symbols are necessary but never final. That reality always exceeds our descriptions, that beneath every equation blooms an unseen rose. The eternal question, so were the Rosicrucians scientists or mystics? The answer is both, and neither. They were dreamers who believed knowledge could heal, who saw science and spirit not as enemies but as lovers. They worked in shadows, leaving no clear record, yet their whispers shaped those who founded modern disciplines. They promised a golden age, and in some ways it arrived, yet always entwined with shadow. Their legacy is not institutions, but questions. Can knowledge save us? Can science heal not only the body but the soul? Can secrecy protect wisdom, or does it risk control? Can roses bloom without crosses? These questions remain as urgent now as in the 17th century. The rose in the laboratory. Picture a modern scientist in a white coat leaning over a microscope. Slides are illuminated, cells shifting under glass. Data streams onto screens. The lab hums with machines. No roses, no crosses, only steel and light. And yet, if one listens closely, the same questions whisper here as in Rosenkreuz's tomb. What is life? What is transformation? What is the hidden order binding matter and spirit? The laboratory is another alchemical chamber. The scientist, another initiate. And the discoveries, cures, insights, revelations are roses blooming silently upon the cross of matter. The whisper that persists. 4 centuries after the Rosicrucian manifestos, science dominates our world. Satellites circle the Earth, genomes are sequenced, machines learn to think. The invisible college has become global, and yet the Rosicrucian whisper persists, that knowledge is sacred, that it must serve humanity, that secrecy may be both shield and snare, that the rose blooms only upon the cross. Perhaps that is why the Rosicrucians remain enigmatic. They remind us that progress is not enough without wisdom, that science without spirit is incomplete, that roses cannot live long if severed from their roots. The Rosicrucians gave us no formulas, no final truths. They gave us a symbol, the rose upon the cross, and left us to interpret it anew. In science as in mysticism, in secrecy as in revelation, the rose still blooms. If the Rosicrucians had no cathedrals of stone, they had cathedrals of words. Their manifestos, Fama Fraternitatis, Confessio Fraternitatis, the chemical wedding, were themselves literary creations, shimmering between allegory and proclamation. From that first spark, their imagery, myths, and ideals drifted like perfume through European literature, staining poems, plays, and novels with the scent of the rose-cross. Some invoked them reverently, others mocked them. Many simply borrowed their symbols, weaving them into tales of mystery and transformation. And so, long after the Brotherhood itself receded into myth, their literary legacy endured. 17th century echoes. The immediate aftermath of the Rosicrucian manifestos was a flood of pamphlets and satires. Playwrights lampooned the invisible Brotherhood. In Paris, comedies staged bumbling Rosicrucians as charlatans promising eternal life but failing spectacularly. In England, writers folded them into tales of quacks and alchemists, poking fun at gullible seekers. Yet even satire served to spread the myth. For every laugh, another reader wondered, what if it were true? What if behind the jokes lay real secrets? Meanwhile, more serious authors wove the Rosicrucians into allegories. Johann Valentin Andream, often suspected as the author of the manifestos, published Christianopolis, 1619, a utopian novel describing a city of the wise. It was no open declaration of Rosicrucianism, yet its vision of a society governed by learning and virtue echoed the invisible college. Andrea's blend of allegory, satire, and utopian vision set a pattern. The Rosicrucians would appear in literature as dream, as joke, and as prophecy all at once. Milton, Comenius, and the vision of reform. The Rosicrucian promise of reform resonated with thinkers who dreamed of educational and social renewal. John Milton, in his writings on education, drew upon the same language of universal reformation. Though he never named the Rosicrucians, their spirit of uniting science, faith, and learning echoed in his calls for a broad curriculum that would raise man toward divine understanding. Even more directly, Jan Amos Comenius, the Moravian pedagogue, was deeply influenced by Rosicrucian ideals. He dreamed of a pansophia, universal wisdom that would reconcile all sciences and faiths. His Labyrinth of the World and the Paradise of the Heart reads like a Rosicrucian allegory, guiding the seeker through confusion to inner illumination. Communist educational reforms, the idea that all should be taught, that knowledge should be shared freely, were themselves a Rosicrucian inheritance. In his books, the Invisible College found one of its most enduring voices, the Romantic rediscovery. It was in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, however, that the Rosicrucians bloomed most richly in literature. The Romantics, hungering for mystery in an age of reason, seized upon their myths like rare flowers. In Germany, Novalis, Friedrich von Hardenberg, became the great Rosicrucian poet. Fascinated by the manifestos, he wrote fragments describing Christian Rosenkreuz as a mystical figure of longing, the seeker par excellence. His unfinished novel, The Novices of Say, evokes a world where nature hides veiled wisdom, awaiting initiation, a theme drawn straight from Hermetic and Rosicrucian lore. Goethe, too, absorbed Rosicrucian influences. In Faust, the alchemical quest for ultimate knowledge mirrors the Rosicrucian journey, the hunger for transformation, the descent into despair, the possibility of redemption through love. In his scientific writings, Goethe echoed the principle of correspondence, that nature and spirit mirror one another, that the leaf and the cosmos unfold by the same law. For the Romantics, the Rosicrucians embodied the fusion of poetry and philosophy, science and mysticism. They were not merely a secret society, but a symbol of the imagination's power to see the cosmos as a living text. Rosicrucians in English poetry. In England, the Rosicrucian myth took on playful and satirical tones. Alexander Pope, in his Rape of the Lock, 1712, invoked Rosicrucians as airy spirits attending to maidens, transforming the solemn brotherhood into whimsical sylphs. He borrowed their name but emptied it of seriousness, turning them into literary devices. Yet even here, the Rosicrucians were kept alive in public imagination. Later poets, however, returned to deeper themes. William Blake filled his works with alchemical and mystical imagery. Though he never explicitly declared himself a Rosicrucian, his visions of roses entwined with crucifixions, of hidden cities of light, resonate strongly with their symbolism. Blake's line, "The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom," could have been penned by an alchemist or Rosenkreuz himself. Percy Bysshe Shelley and Lord Byron, with their fascination for secret orders, forbidden knowledge, and the suffering seeker, also carried echoes of Rosicrucian myth, though refracted through Romantic rebellion. The Gothic and the occult novel. As the 19th century unfolded, Rosicrucian imagery seeped into Gothic and occult fiction. Writers discovered in the Rose Cross a perfect emblem of hidden power and haunting beauty. Bulwer Lytton's Zanoni, 1842, became one of the most influential Rosicrucian novels. It tells of an immortal adept, guardian of hidden wisdom, who sacrifices himself out of love. Here, Rosicrucianism appears not as satire but as high romance, a tale of eternal seekers, of secret wisdom preserved through ages. The novel enchanted readers and helped shape the Victorian image of the Rosicrucian as mysterious sage. Later, in the French occult revival, authors like Eliphas Lévy wove Rosicrucianism into treatises on magic, presenting the Brotherhood as custodians of an ancient esoteric current. Fiction blurred with philosophy, myth with scholarship. By the fin de siècle, Rosicrucian imagery appeared in symbolist poetry, in the decadent visions of writers like Stéphane Mallarmé and Joséphin Péladan, who even founded a Rosicrucian salon of artists in Paris. The Rosicrucian Salon of Paris. One of the strangest episodes of the literary Rosicrucian revival was Joséphin Péladan's Ordre de la Rose-Croix catholique du Temple et du Graal, founded in 1890 Paris. Péladan was a novelist, critic, and flamboyant mystic. Declaring himself a Rosicrucian Grand Master, he gathered painters, poets, and musicians into salons and exhibitions. His Salon de la Rose-Croix showcased symbolist art filled with mystical imagery, Madonnas, angels, crucified roses, esoteric allegories. Though many saw it as theatrical eccentricity, Péladan's order influenced the avant-garde. Writers and artists of Parisian Bohemia drank from his Rosicrucian chalice, blending mysticism with decadence, art with ritual. For a brief, glittering moment, the Rose Cross became the emblem of modern art itself. 20th century currents. The 20th century continued the Rosicrucian literary current, though often more subtly. Modernist poets like Yeats, a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, carried Rosicrucian symbolism into his verse. His poems of mystical unions, cycles of history, and hidden orders echo the Rosecreuz's paradox of beauty and suffering. Fantasy and occult fiction also drew upon the myth. Writers like Arthur Machen, Dion Fortune, and later Umberto Eco in Foucault's Pendulum reimagined Rosicrucians as guardians of hidden knowledge, blending fact and fiction into labyrinths of secrecy. Even in popular culture, the Rosicrucians surfaced as mysterious figures in thrillers, as symbols of hidden power in novels about secret societies. Each retelling added to the myth, ensuring that Christian Rosenkreuz still walked, in some guise, through the pages of literature. The Rosenkreuz as literary archetype. Across centuries, the Rosicrucians have been many things in literature: satirical sprites in Pope's mock epic, utopian sages in Andrea and Comenius, romantic seekers in Novalis and Goethe, immortal adepts in Bulwer Lytton's Zanoni, mystical symbols in symbolist poetry, hidden conspirators in modern thrillers. What unites these portrayals is the paradox of the Rosenkreuz itself: beauty and pain, secrecy and revelation, myth and reality. The Rosicrucian becomes not a character, but an archetype, the eternal seeker, custodian of hidden wisdom, half mocked, half revered. The whisper of allegory, perhaps the truest Rosicrucian legacy in literature, is not any single book, but allegory itself. Their manifestos were never plain treatises, but stories, dreams, riddles. They insisted that wisdom cannot be handed directly, only veiled in narrative. Writers across centuries inherited this approach. They wrote novels that were not just tales, but initiations, poems that were not just words, but keys, plays that masked ritual within drama. The Rosicrucian style, allegory layered with symbol, became part of Western literature's DNA. The eternal reader. Picture a reader in any century. A candle burns in the 17th, a lamp in the 19th, a screen in the 21st. The reader turns pages. Andrea, Goethe, Bulwer Lytton, Eco. Somewhere within the words, a rose blooms on a cross. The reader pauses, feels a stirring, wonders if there is more than story here. If the book is itself an initiation. This is the Rosicrucian legacy. Not doctrines, not institutions, but whispers carried in literature. Whispers that awaken, unsettle, inspire. The Rosicrucian Brotherhood may have remained invisible, but in literature they are everywhere. Laughing in satire, weeping in romance, veiled in allegory, radiant in symbol. Their truest temple is the library, their truest lodge, the page, their truest initiation, the act of reading itself. From the very beginning, the Rosicrucian story carried a tantalizing ambiguity. The manifesto spoke of a brotherhood scattered yet united, unseen yet present, invisible yet powerful. They promised wisdom, healing and guidance, but never revealed faces, never gave names. This secrecy left a vacuum into which imagination rushed. If the Rosicrucians were real, who were they? Where did they dwell? How did they move unseen? The idea of hidden masters, enlightened adepts guiding humanity from the shadows, was born. Over the centuries, this idea grew into a myth that far outlived the manifestos themselves. It spread into Freemasonry, theosophy, occult movements, and even modern conspiracy theories. Always the same theme: unseen guardians, invisible teachers, hidden rulers of destiny. The invisible adepts of Rosenkreuz. The earliest Rosicrucian legends described Christian Rosenkreuz as a solitary wanderer who had travelled to the east, gathered wisdom, and founded a secret fraternity. At his death, the brethren concealed his tomb, hidden for 120 years before its rediscovery. Inside, they found his body miraculously preserved, his lamp still burning. Already here the motif of hidden adepts emerges. The Rosicrucians were not public teachers but invisible guides, appearing only when the world was ready. They lived outside time, their wisdom untouched by decay. The manifestos hinted that the fraternity moved unseen through Europe, guiding events, whispering in courts, healing in villages. They were never to be recognized, but always present. Thus the myth of hidden masters took root. Wise men living in secrecy, guardians of humanity, revealing themselves only to the worthy. The Hermetic custodians. This idea did not arise in a vacuum. Long before Rosenkreuz, ancient traditions spoke of hidden guardians. In Egypt, priests of Thoth were said to preserve wisdom in hidden chambers beneath temples. In Greek lore, the Pythagorean Brotherhood lived in silence, passing secret teachings only to initiates. In Jewish mysticism, legends told of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, 36 hidden righteous men whose existence preserved the world. The Rosicrucians absorbed and rephrased these traditions. They presented themselves as heirs of the Hermetic chain, custodians of the Prisca Theologia, the ancient wisdom revealed at the dawn of time. Their invisibility was not absence, but protection. The wisdom was too dangerous for the unprepared. The Theosophical Masters. In the 19th century, the myth of hidden masters resurfaced with new power in the Theosophical movement. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, spoke often of the Masters of Wisdom, or Mahatmas, beings of great knowledge living in hidden retreats, especially in Tibetan India. These masters, she claimed, guided her writings and inspired the Society's mission. Though she placed them in the East, the concept was recognizably Rosicrucian. Invisible adepts, guardians of ancient wisdom, guiding humanity through chosen emissaries. Blavatsky even connected her masters with the Rosicrucians, suggesting continuity of the hidden fraternity across ages. Letters allegedly written by these Mahatmas circulated among Theosophists, further fueling belief. Whether literal or symbolic, they became central to the idea that humanity's evolution was overseen by unseen guides, occult orders and secret chiefs. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in the 1880s, also embraced the myth of hidden masters. They spoke of the secret chiefs, invisible adepts who directed the order from beyond the material plane. Leaders of the Golden Dawn claimed to receive instructions from these chiefs, guiding the rituals and teachings of the fraternity. Aleister Crowley too claimed contact with hidden masters, whom he called the AA, or Great White Brotherhood. For him, as for many occultists, initiation was not simply study but alignment with these unseen guides. Thus, in the occult revival, the Rosicrucian myth of invisible adepts expanded into elaborate hierarchies of secret chiefs, astral masters, and hidden fraternities directing human destiny. The allure of the hidden. Why does the myth of hidden masters endure? Part of the allure lies in reassurance. In times of chaos, wars, plagues, revolutions, the thought that wise guardians watch over humanity brings comfort. Even if unseen, they suggest that history is not random, but guided by higher purpose. Part lies in initiation. To believe in hidden masters is to believe in hidden potential, that one might be chosen, contacted, guided. It flatters the seeker, suggesting that behind the veil lies a fraternity ready to welcome the worthy, and part lies in projection. Hidden masters are mirrors. To some, they are benevolent guardians. To others, sinister conspirators. The same myth fuels both mystical comfort and paranoid fear. From wisdom to conspiracy, indeed the myth of hidden masters has two faces. On one side, they are enlightened adepts, guardians of truth. On the other, they are conspirators, puppet masters, hidden rulers manipulating nations. In the 18th century, conspiracy theories about secret orders began to flourish. The Illuminati, often confused with Rosicrucians and Freemasons, were accused of secretly directing revolutions. Pamphlets warned of hidden cabals undermining throne and altar. In modern times, conspiracy theories still speak of shadowy elites, world-controlling fraternities, unseen hands shaping history. Though stripped of their mystical aura, these conspiracies are heirs of the Rosicrucian myth of invisibility. The hidden masters have become both saints and devils, psychological dimensions. On a deeper level, the myth of hidden masters reflects inner psychology. Carl Jung suggested that figures of hidden guides represent the self, the higher integrated wholeness of the psyche. To imagine invisible adepts is to project one's inner wisdom outward, personifying the guiding principle of individuation. The Rosicrucian masters, then, may not dwell in hidden valleys or astral planes, but in the unconscious depths of each seeker. To encounter them is to encounter one's own potential, veiled until the soul is ready. This reading does not diminish the myth but enriches it. The hidden masters are eternal precisely because they are archetypal, mirrors of humanity's longing for guidance, wholeness, and unseen order. Modern Rosicrucian masters. In the 20th century, Rosicrucian orders like Amorc, ancient mystical order Rosicrucis, continued the tradition. They spoke of guidance from invisible masters, though often framed as symbolic rather than literal. Lessons taught that initiation connects the seeker to a current of wisdom stretching back through centuries, preserved by unseen guardians. Here the hidden masters became less literal figures and more metaphors for tradition itself. The continuity of the Hermetic chain, the presence of wisdom in every age. Yet the myth persisted. Some members still believed in literal adepts, hidden in temples or remote retreats, awaiting the time to reveal themselves. The ambiguity remains, as it always has. The eternal quest. The search for hidden masters is not about finding an address, a monastery in Tibet, or a name in a genealogy. It is about yearning itself, the human hunger for unseen order, for guides beyond the ordinary, for wisdom that transcends time. Whether real or imagined, the hidden masters endure because they embody hope. Hope that knowledge is preserved, that humanity is not alone, that there are watchers in the shadows working for good. And perhaps, even if no literal fraternity meets in secret chambers, the myth itself becomes real by shaping seekers, inspiring movements, guiding generations. For what is a master, if not a symbol that awakens mastery within? The rose of the hidden. The rose cross itself is emblem of the hidden master. The cross is visible, wood, and suffering, the world we know. The rose blooms upon it, beauty hidden within, fragrance invisible yet real. To seek hidden masters is to seek the rose within the cross, the unseen blooming within the visible. Whether they dwell in distant lands, astral planes, or within the psyche, they are real insofar as they awaken seekers to the mystery of hidden wisdom. A whisper across centuries. Picture a seeker across time. In the 17th century he reads the Fama, wondering if Rosicrucians walk unseen in his city. In the 19th he joins a lodge, hoping to meet the secret chiefs. In the 20th he reads Blavatsky's Mahatma letters, dreaming of adepts in Tibet. In the 21st he scans forums of conspiracy, searching for hidden elites behind global events. Each seeker is different, yet the longing is the same. The desire to believe that there is guidance beyond chaos, wisdom beyond ignorance, masters beyond sight. The quest never ends. For the hidden masters are not only historical figures but archetypes, reflections of humanity's eternal longing for unseen guardians, the eternal quest for hidden masters. It is not about proving or disproving their existence. It is about the yearning they embody, the whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, wisdom is never lost, only hidden, waiting for seekers to be ready. The Rosicrucians began as a whisper in the early 17th century. For centuries they vanished, reappeared, mutated, and were reinterpreted by poets, philosophers, Freemasons, theosophists, and occultists. And yet, their fragrance remains, even in our modern world. We live in an age of technology, satellites, and microscopes, where mysteries seem ever more fragile under the weight of science. Yet paradoxically, the hunger for mystery has not disappeared. It has simply found new forms, and in those forms, New Age spirituality, modern esoteric orders, personal mysticism, the Rosicrucian current still flows. The 20th century orders. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Rosicrucian current found institutional form in new societies. The most influential was Amorous, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucis, founded by Harvey Spencer Lewis in 1915 in New York. Lewis claimed initiation into a European Rosicrucian order, presenting Amorc as the continuation of the ancient fraternity. The order grew rapidly, establishing lodges across America and later the world. Amorc presented Rosicrucianism not as secret conspiracy, but as structured mystical study. Members received correspondence lessons on meditation, metaphysics, alchemy, sacred geometry, and cosmic consciousness. The order's headquarters in San Jose, California, built a Rosicrucian Egyptian museum, a striking return to the Hermetic chain's roots in Egypt. Other groups also claim the Rosicrucian legacy. The Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, founded earlier in the 19th century, continued as an invitation-only society for Master Masons. The Fraternitas Rosicrucis, tracing its lineage to Pascal Beverly Randolph, emphasized sexual mysticism and magical practices. Each order offered its own interpretation, sometimes clashing, sometimes overlapping, yet all claimed descent from the same invisible college. By the mid-20th century, one could join a Rosicrucian order as easily as joining a church or fraternity. What had once been a hidden whisper became structured organizations with newsletters, headquarters, and membership fees. And yet, even institutionalized, the fragrance of the Rose Cross remained. Rosicrucianism and the New Age. In the second half of the 20th century, the New Age movement exploded. A sprawling mix of Eastern spirituality, channeling, astrology, healing practices, and esoteric traditions. Rosicrucian ideals flowed easily into this new current. The vision of universal wisdom, of humanity evolving toward higher consciousness, of hidden masters guiding behind the veil, all these Rosicrucian themes re-emerged. Books on sacred geometry, energy healing, crystal resonance, and cosmic consciousness often echoed the same principles once hidden in the manifestos. The idea of the microcosm and macrocosm, so central to Rosicrucian and Hermetic thought, became a foundation of New Age belief. The body reflects the universe. Healing the self heals the world. The promise of a coming age of light, once whispered in the Confessio, was reborn as the Age of Aquarius. Some New Age writers directly invoked Rosicrucianism, others absorbed it unknowingly, as their sources, theosophy, alchemy, astrology, had already been infused with Rosicrucian themes. Thus, even without name, the Rosicrucian current watered the New Age garden. Modern mystical practices. Today, many practices that pass as alternative spirituality carry Rosicrucian undertones. Meditation and visualization, exercises of inner light, cosmic attunement or ascension echo, Rosicrucian meditations on the harmony of spirit and cosmos. Healing modalities. From Reiki to vibrational medicine, the idea that invisible forces shape health mirrors, Rosicrucian doctrines of correspondences, sacred geometry, popular books and workshops on the flower of life, Platonic solids, and cosmic ratios recall the Rosicrucian fascination with hidden mathematical harmonies. Pathworking and initiation. Many modern esoteric schools structure spiritual growth through symbolic stages, echoing the initiatory path of the chemical wedding. Few practitioners today may call themselves Rosicrucians, yet in their language and practices the rose cross blooms invisibly. Rosicrucianism in modern psychology and science. Beyond spiritual circles, the Rosicrucian currents also seep into psychology and speculative science. Carl Jung's use of alchemy as a symbolic system for the psyche has already been noted. His writings on individuation, the process by which the self integrates opposites into wholeness, parallel the Rosicrucian alchemical wedding. Jung's Mysterium Conjunctionis could almost be read as a Rosicrucian text. In transpersonal psychology, themes of cosmic consciousness, archetypal symbolism, and mystical experience continue the same lineage. Modern peak experience research resonates with the Rosicrucian vision of union between microcosm and macrocosm. Even in speculative physics, the dream of hidden order lingers. Theories of unified fields, holographic universes, and multidimensional realities sound like hermetic echoes translated into equations. Scientists may not call themselves Rosicrucians, but their yearning to find hidden unity beneath chaos is the same yearning. The continuing myth of the hidden masters. In modern spirituality, the myth of hidden masters flourishes as strongly as in Blavatsky's time. Channelers speak of ascended masters. Saint-Germain, often identified with a Rosicrucian adept, appears frequently as a guide in New Age teachings. He is portrayed as immortal, ever-present, whispering wisdom to those who listen. The idea of invisible adepts guiding humanity persists in countless modern movements, from esoteric Christian mysticism to UFO contact groups. The language may shift, from brotherhood to star beings, from hidden masters to guides, but the structure remains. The Rosicrucian promise of unseen guardians has adapted to new mythologies but never faded. Rosicrucianism in popular culture. Beyond formal spirituality, Rosicrucian imagery surfaces in novels, films, and art. Mystery thrillers often feature Rosicrucian orders as shadowy conspirators. From Eco's Foucault's Pendulum to countless modern novels about secret societies, the Rose Cross is shorthand for hidden power. In films and games, Rosicrucians appear as cryptic guardians of lost wisdom, protecting secrets that could transform the world. Even music and visual art borrow their symbols. Album covers, fantasy illustrations, and occult-inspired fashion frequently use the Rose Cross as emblem, often without awareness of its deep lineage. The symbol continues to enchant, its paradox of beauty and suffering irresistible. The paradox of accessibility. One striking difference between the 17th century and today is accessibility. Where once seekers had to scour hidden pamphlets, today anyone can type Rosicrucian into a search engine and find thousands of references. Amorc offers courses by mail. The Rosicrucian Museum welcomes visitors daily. Bookshelves abound with guides to alchemy, hermeticism, and mystical initiation. Yet this accessibility carries a paradox. The more available the teachings become, the less mysterious they appear. For some, the loss of secrecy diminishes the aura. For others, accessibility fulfills the promise of the manifestos, that wisdom should be free to all who seek. The Rosenkreuz has always thrived on ambiguity. Perhaps its survival lies in balancing secrecy and revelation, accessibility and mystery. The modern seeker. Picture a seeker in our own century. They may not wear robes or gather in lodges. Instead, they sit at a computer, reading late into the night. They click through archives of Rosicrucian manifestos, order a book of Hermetic philosophy, meditate with a crystal, or join an online forum of mystics. They are as scattered as ever, in New York, Seoul, São Paulo, Cairo. They may never meet in person, yet invisibly, through shared texts, symbols and dreams, they form their own college. In this sense, the invisible fraternity has never vanished. It has simply changed form, adapting to the tools of each age. Quills and pamphlets in the 17th century, encrypted letters in the 19th, digital forums in the 21st. The essence is the same. Seekers scattered yet united, bound not by creed but by longing. The Rosenkreuz in the age of light and shadow. Our age is filled with contradictions. Technology connects us globally, yet isolates us personally. Science heals, yet threatens with weapons and surveillance. Information is abundant, yet wisdom scarce. In such a world, the Rosicrucian current is more relevant than ever. The rose upon the cross reminds us that beauty and suffering are entwined, that wisdom and shadow cannot be separated, that hope must root itself in struggle. Modern mysticism, whether in structured orders or solitary seekers, continues to carry this truth. Every meditation on inner light, every ritual of union, every poem of hidden wisdom is another petal opening on the eternal rose, an endless bloom. The Rosicrucians began as rumour, satire, allegory. They became myth, movement and mystery, and still, 4 centuries later, the rose blooms. Not in a single temple, but in countless hearts. Not in one doctrine, but in many interpretations. Not in secrecy alone, but in the paradox of hidden wisdom revealed through symbol. Modern mysticism has taken their current and woven it into the vast tapestry of spirituality. Some petals are gaudy, some fragile, some luminous. But the bloom endures. The Rosicrucian current is not a relic. It is a stream flowing still, invisible yet real, carrying seekers into the mystery where science and spirit, symbol and silence, rose and cross are one. 4 centuries have passed since the first Rosicrucian manifestos fluttered across Europe, like autumn leaves carrying whispers of hidden gardens. Their words promised reformation, healing, and unseen fraternity. They offered no names, no addresses, only symbols, a rose, a cross, a tomb lit by an eternal lamp. And yet the world has never forgotten them. Through wars, revolutions, renaissances, and revivals, the myth of the Rosicrucians has endured. Sometimes mocked, sometimes revered, sometimes reinvented, they remain an enigma, neither entirely real nor entirely unreal, existing in the liminal space between fact and dream. A journey through ages. We have followed their trail across centuries. In the 17th century they emerged as sudden rumour. Pamphlets proclaiming reform, scholars debating their reality, seekers scouring libraries for hidden signs. In the 18th their imagery seeped into Freemasonry, blending with the architecture of Solomon's Temple and the ideals of fraternity. Their invisible college inspired the Royal Society, where science first organised itself as collective pursuit. In the 19th they were reborn in the occult revival. Theosophists spoke of hidden masters, the Golden Dawn invoked their symbols, poets like Yeats and Novalis wove their fragrance into verse. In the 20th they became institutions, a morgue, Societas Rosicruciana, museums and orders presenting themselves as heirs of Rosenkreuz. And in the 21st they linger still, in New Age movements, in thrillers and conspiracies, in digital lodges and online seekers. Always changing, never fading. What was real? Historians still argue, were the Rosicrucians ever real? Perhaps the original manifestos were literary inventions, allegories by Johann Valentin Andrea or his circle. Perhaps no secret fraternity ever existed in 17th century Germany. And yet, the power of myth is not diminished by uncertain origins. The Rosicrucians may have begun as fiction, but they became reality through belief. Seekers gathered, lodges formed, rituals evolved. The dream summoned its own flesh. In this sense, the Rosicrucians are real, not as fixed institution, but as living myth. They are a rose blooming in imagination, a cross carved into history. The rose and the cross as eternal symbols, Why has the symbol endured so powerfully? The rose, beauty, secrecy, unfolding, the fragrance of spirit. The cross, suffering, matter, mortality, the axis of the world. Together they form a paradox that speaks to the human soul. Life is never only rose or cross, but both. Suffering and beauty, shadow and light, death and renewal. The Rosicrucians offered not dogma but symbol, and symbols live longer than doctrines. They invite interpretation, reflection, reinvention. Each seeker sees the rose cross anew, as Christ's love, as alchemical union, as cosmic geometry, as inner transformation. Thus the symbol never exhausts itself, it blooms again in each age, in each heart. The invisible college as eternal ideal. The dream of an invisible college, seekers scattered yet united, working quietly for humanity's good, has never vanished. It lives in scientific communities sharing research across borders. It lives in online networks of mystics and philosophers. It lives in every circle of seekers who gather not for profit or fame, but for wisdom. The Rosicrucians never claimed to be the only invisible college. They claimed only to remind us that such a fellowship is always possible. Wherever seekers meet in humility, wherever knowledge is pursued for service, the invisible college is present. The shadows they cast. Yet the Rosicrucian legacy is not without shadow. The same secrecy that inspired seekers also fueled suspicion. Hidden fraternities easily become conspiracies in the imagination. The same symbol of the rose cross has been invoked in both mystical poetry and paranoid tracts. Utopian visions of universal reformation inspired revolutions, but also unleashed blood and terror. Promises of healing sometimes invited charlatans. The dream of hidden masters became for some the nightmare of hidden rulers. Like the rose itself, the Rosicrucian myth carries thorns, beauty and danger entwined. The psychological reading. Perhaps the most profound way to understand the Rosicrucians is inwardly. The tomb of Rosenkreuz is the psyche itself. The eternal lamp burning in darkness is the soul's own hidden light. The invisible brethren are not external figures but archetypes, aspects of our higher self guiding us through life's alchemy. In this reading, every seeker is a Rosicrucian. Every moment of suffering born with wisdom, every act of love blooming from pain, every insight wrested from silence, all are initiations in the invisible college of the heart. The rose cross is not a symbol to be joined, but a mystery to be lived. The rose that blooms still. Today, in a world saturated with information yet starved of wisdom, the Rosicrucian whisper is perhaps more relevant than ever. They remind us that science and spirit need not be enemies, that healing must embrace both body and soul, that wisdom without humility is poison, that beauty and suffering are inseparable, that progress without inner transformation is empty. They remind us that beyond institutions and dogmas, there is always an invisible college. Seekers, artists, scientists, dreamers, poets. Scattered, unorganized, yet united by longing for truth. The enduring mystery. And so, we return to the beginning. The manifestos of 1614-1616 offered no clear answers, only riddles. Who wrote them? Who were the brethren? Were they jest, allegory, or proclamation? We still do not know, but perhaps this is the secret. The Rosicrucians endure because they remain unresolved. Their invisibility is their power. By never stepping fully into the light, they remain always alive in shadow, always ready to be rediscovered, always adaptable to new ages. The rose blooms because the cross conceals its roots. The whisper at midnight. Picture this final scene. A lone seeker sits at night. The world quiet, a book open before them. On the page an emblem, a rose blooming on a cross. The candle flickers. Outside, wind stirs. The seeker leans closer, not sure why their heart quickens. They cannot explain the symbol, not fully, but something in it speaks of beauty and suffering, of hidden wisdom, of hope. In that moment the invisible college is present. The seeker has entered its chamber, and perhaps that is all the Rosicrucians ever wanted. Not recognition, not power, but to awaken that moment of wonder. The Rosicrucians remain, not in one lodge or lineage, but in the mystery itself, in the rose that blooms on the cross, in the lamp that burns unseen, in the whisper that knowledge is never lost, only hidden. The enduring mystery is this: the rose cross is not history, it is eternity.